Chapter 11. Observing me, he switched off the dreamy look. "Oh, hello, Bertie," he said. "I wanted to see you." "Oh, yes," I riposted, quick as a flash, and I meant it to sting, for I was feeling a bit fed with cat's meat. I mean, of his own free will, he'd taken on the job of valeting me, and in his capacity of my gentleman's personal gentleman should have been in and out all the time, brushing here a coat, pressing there a trouser, and generally making himself useful, and I hadn't set eyes on him since the night we'd arrived. One frowns on this absenteeism. "I wanted to tell you the good news." I laughed hollowly. "Good news? Is there such a thing?" "You bet there's such a thing. Things are looking up. The sun is smiling through. I believe I'm going to swing this Gertrude deal. Owing to the footling social conventions which prevent visiting valets hobnobbing with the daughter of the house, I haven't seen her, of course, to speak to. But I've been sending her notes by Jeeves, and she's been sending me notes by Jeeves, and in her latest she shows distinct signs of yielding to my prayers. I think about 2 more communications, if carefully worded, should do the trick. Don't actually buy the fish slice yet, but be prepared." My pique vanished. As I've said before, the Worcesters are fair-minded. I knew what a dickens of a sweat these love letters are, a whole-time job calling for incessant concentration. If cat's meat had been tied up with a lot of correspondence of this type, he wouldn't have had much time for attending to my wardrobe. Of course, you can't press your suit and another fellow's trousers simultaneously. "Well, that's fine," I said, pleased to learn that, though the general outlook was so scaly, someone was getting a break. "I shall watch your future progress with considerable interest. But pigeonholing your love life for the moment, cat's meat, a most frightful thing has happened, and I should be glad if you could come across with anything in the aid and comfort line. That criminal lunatic, Gussie, what's he been doing?" "It's what he's not been doing that's the trouble. You could have flattened me with a toothpick just now, and I found out that he hasn't written a single line to Madeline Bassett since he got here. And, what's more, he says he isn't going to write to her. He says he's teaching her a lesson," I said, and in a few brief words placed the facts before him. He looked properly concerned. Cat's meat is a kindly and feeling heart, readily moved by the spectacle of an old friend splashing about in the gumbo, and he knows how I stand with regard to Madeline Bassett, because she told him the whole story one day when they met at a bazaar, and the subject of me happened to come up. "Well, this is rather serious," he said. "You bet it's serious. I'm shaking like a leaf. Girls of the Madeline Bassett type attach such importance to the daily letter." "Exactly. And if it fails to arrive, they come and make inquiries on the spot." "And you say Gussie was not to be moved?" "Not an inch. I pleaded with him, I may say passionately, but he put his ears back and refused to cooperate." Cat's meat pondered. "I think I know what's behind all this. The trouble is that Gussie at the moment is slightly off his rocker." "What do you mean, at the moment? And why slightly?" "He's infatuated with Corky. Sorry to use such long words. I mean, he's got a crush on her." "I know he has. So does everybody else for miles around. His crush is the favourite topic of conversation when aunt meets aunt." "There has been comment in the servants' hall, too." "I'm not surprised. I bet they're discussing the thing in Basingstoke." "Well, you can't blame him, of course." "Yes, I can. I mean, it isn't his fault, really. This is springtime, Bertie, the mating season, when, as you probably know, a livelier iris gleams upon the burnished dove, and a young man's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love. The sudden impact, plumb spang in the middle of spring, of a girl like Corky on a fat head like Gussie, weakened by constantly swilling orange juice, must have been terrific. Corky, when she's going nicely, bowls over the strongest. No one knows that better than you. You were making a colossal ass of yourself over her one time." "No need to rake up the dead past." "I only raked it up to drive home my point, which is that he is more to be pitied than censured." "She's the one that wants censoring. Why does she encourage him?" "I don't think she encourages him. He just adheres." "She does encourage him. I've seen her doing it. She deliberately turns on the charm and gives him the old personality. Don't tell me that a girl like Corky, accustomed to giving Hollywood glamour men the brusheroo, couldn't put Gussie on ice if she wanted to." "But she doesn't." "Well, that's what I'm beefing about." "And I'll tell you why she doesn't. I haven't actually asked her, but I'm pretty sure she's working this Gussie continuity with the idea of sticking the harpoon into Esmond Haddock, to show him that if he doesn't want her, there are others who do. But he does want her. Well, she doesn't know that, unless you've told her. I haven't. Why not? Well, I wasn't sure if it'd be the correct procedure. You see, he dished out all that stuff about his inner feelings under the seal of the confessional, as you might say, and he said he didn't want it to go any further. This must go no further, he said. On the other hand, a word in season might quite easily reunite a couple of sundered hearts. The whole thing is extraordinarily moot. I'd go ahead and tell her. Bung in the word in season. I'm all for reuniting sundered hearts. Me too, but I think we've left it too late. Already the Basset is burning up the wires with telegrams asking what it's all about. A hot one just arrived. I found it on the hall table when I came in. It was the telegram of a girl on the verge of becoming fed to the eye teeth. I tell you, Catsmeat, I see no ray of light. I'm sunk. No, you're not. I am. When I told Gussie about this telegram, urging upon him that now was the time for all good men to come to the aid of the party, he merely, as I say, stuck his ears back and said he was teaching the girl a lesson, and not a smell of a letter should she get from him till that lesson had been learned. The man's non-compass, and I repeat that I see no ray of light. It seems to me it's all quite simple. You mean you have something to suggest? Of course I've something to suggest. I always have something to suggest. The thing's obvious. If Gussie won't write to this girl, you must write to her yourself. But she doesn't want to hear from me. She wants to hear from Gussie. And so she will, bless her heart. Gussie has sprained his wrist, so had to dictate the letter to you. Gussie hasn't sprained his wrist. Pardon me. He gave it a nasty wrench while stopping a runaway horse, and at great personal risk saving a little child from a hideous death. A golden-haired child, if you will allow yourself to be guided by me, with blue eyes, pink cheeks, and a lisp. I think a lisp is good box office. I gasped at him. I'd got his drift. Catsmeat, this is terrific. You'll write the thing. Of course, it'll be pie. I've been writing Gertrude that sort of letter since I was so high. He seated himself at the table, took pen and paper, and immediately became immersed in composition, as the expression is. I could see that it had been no idle boast on his part that the thing would be pie. He didn't even seem to have to stop and think. In almost no time, he was handing me the finished script and bidding me get a jerk on and copy it out. It ought to go off at once, every moment being vital. Trot down to the post office with yourself. Then she'll get it first thing in the morning. And now, Bertie, I must leave you. I promised to play gin rummy with Queenie, and I'm already late. She wants cheering up, poor child. You've heard about her tragedy, the severing of her engagement to the flatty, Dobbs? No, really? Is her engagement off? Then that's why she was looking like that, I suppose. I ran into her after lunch. I explained, and I got the impression that the heart was heavy. What went wrong? She didn't like him being an atheist, and he wouldn't stop being an atheist, and finally he said something about Jonah and the whale, which was impossible for her to overlook. This morning she returned the ring, his letters, and a china ornament with a present from Blackpool on it, which he brought her last summer while visiting relatives in the north. It's hit her pretty hard, I'm afraid. She's passing through the furnace. She loves him madly and yearns to be his. But you can't take that stuff about Jonah and the whale. One can only hope that gin rummy will do something to ease the pain. Right-ho, Bertie, get on with that letter. It's not actually one of my best, perhaps, because I was working against time and couldn't prune and polish. But I think you'll like it. He was correct. I studied the communication carefully and was enchanted with its virtuosity. If it wasn't one of his best must have been pretty good. And I was not surprised that upon receipt of a series, Gertrude Winkworth was awakening. There are letters which sow doubts as to whether this bit here couldn't have been rather more neatly phrased, and that bit there gingered up a trifle. and other letters, of which you say to yourself, "This is the goods, don't alter a word." This was one of the latter letters. He'd got just the right modest touch into the passage about the runaway horse, and the lisping child was terrific. She stuck out like a sore thumb and hogged the show. As for the warmer portions, about missing Madeline every minute and wishing she were here so that he could fold her in his arms and what not, they simply couldn't have been improved upon. I copied the thing out, stuffed it in an envelope, and took it down to the post office, and scarcely had it plopped into the box when I was hailed from behind by a musical soprano, and turning, saw Corky heaving alongside. Chapter 12. I felt profoundly bucked. The very girl I wanted to see. I grabbed her by the arm so that she couldn't do another of her sudden sneaks. "Corky," I said, "I want a long, heart-to-heart talk with you."
"Not about Hollywood?"
"No, not about Hollywood."
"Thank God. I don't think I could have stood any more Hollywood chatter this afternoon." "I wouldn't have believed," she said, proceeding as always to collar the conversation, "that anybody except Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper could be such an authority on the film world as is Mrs. Clara Well-Beloved. She knows much more about it than I do, and I'll have been moving in celluloid circles 2 years come Lammas Eve. She knows exactly how many times everybody's been divorced, and why, how much every picture for the last 20 years has grossed, and how many Warner Brothers there are. She even knows how many times Artie Shaw has been married, which I'll bet he couldn't tell you himself. She asked if I'd ever married Artie Shaw, and when I said no, seemed to think I was pulling her leg, or must have done it without noticing. I tried to explain that when a girl goes to Hollywood she doesn't have to marry Artie Shaw, it's optional. But I don't think I convinced her. A very remarkable old lady, but a bit exhausting after the first hour or two. Did you say you wanted to speak to me about something?"
"Yes, I did."
"Well, why don't you?"
"Because you won't let me get a word in edgeways."
"Oh, have I been talking? I'm sorry. What's on your mind, my king?"
"Gussie."
"Fink Nottle?"
"Fink Nottle is correct."
"The whitest man I know."
"The fat-headest man you know. Listen, Corky, I've just been talking to Catsmeat."
"Did he tell you that he expects shortly to persuade Gertrude Winkworth to elope with him?"
"Yes."
She smiled in a steely sort of way, like one of those women in the Old Testament who used to go about driving spikes into people's heads. "I'm just waiting for that to happen," she said, "so that I can get a good laugh out of seeing Esmond's face when he finds out that his Gertrude has gone off with another. Most amusing it will be. Ha ha," she added. That ha-ha, so like the expiring quack of a duck dying of a broken heart, told me all I wanted to know. I saw that Catsmeat had not erred in his diagnosis of this young shrimp's motives in giving Gussie the old treatment, and I had no option but to slip her the lowdown without further delay. I tapped her on the shoulder and bunged in the word in season. "Corky," I said, "you're a chump. You've got a completely wrong angle on this haddock. So far from being enamoured of Gertrude Winkworth, I don't suppose you would care, except in a distant, cousinly way, if she choked on a fishbone. You are the lodestar of his life." "What?" "I had it from his own lips. He was a bit pickled at the time, which makes it all the more impressive, because in vino... what's the word?" Her eyes had lighted up. She gave a quick gulp. "He said I was the lodestar of his life?" "With a still in front of the lodestar. Mark this," he said, helping himself to port, of which he was already nearly full. "Though she has given me the brusheroo, she is still the lodestar of my life." "Bertie, if you're kidding—" "Of course I'm not." "I hope you're not, because if you are I shall put the curse of the Purbrights on you, and it's not at all the sort of curse you'll enjoy. Tell me more." I told her more. In fact, I told her all. When I'd finished, she laughed like a hyena, and also, for girls never make sense, let fall a pearly tear or two. "Isn't that just the sort of thing he would think up, bless him?" she said, alluding to the hot idea Esmond Haddock had brought back with him from the Basingstoke cinema. "What a woolly lambkin that man is." I was not sure if woolly lambkin was quite the phrase I would have used myself to describe Esmond Haddock,
But I let it go, it being no affair of mine. If she elected to regard a fellow with a 46-inch chest and muscles like writhing snakes as a woolly lambkin, that was up to her. My task, having started a good thing, was to push it along. "In these cirques," I said, "you will probably be glad of a word of advice from a knowledgeable man of the world. Cat's meat appears to have attained excellent results on the Gertrude front, from pouring out his soul in the form of notes. And if you take my tip, you will do the same. Drop Esmond Haddock a civil line telling him you're aching for his presence, and he will lower the world's record racing round to the vicarage to fold you in his arms. He's only waiting for the green light." She shook her head. "No," she said. "Why no?" "We should simply be where we were before." I saw what she was driving at, of course. "I know what's in your mind," I said. "You are alluding to his civil disobedience in re defying his aunts. Well, let me assure you that little difficulty will very shortly yield to treatment. Listen. Esmond Haddock is singing a hunting song at the concert, words by his Aunt Charlotte, music by his Aunt Myrtle. You don't dispute that?" "All correct so far." "Well, supposing that hunting song is a smackerino." And in a few well-chosen words I informed her of Jeeves's tenable theory. "You get the idea," I concluded. "The cheers of the multitude frequently act like a powerful drug on these birds with inferiority complexes. Arouse such birds, as for instance by whistling through your fingers and yelling, 'Bis! Bis!' when they sing hunting songs, and they become changed men. Their morale stiffens, their tails shoot up like rockets. They find themselves regarding the tough eggs before whom they have always been accustomed to crawl as less than the dust beneath their chariot wheels. If Esmond Haddock goes with the bang I anticipate, it won't be long before those aunts of his will be climbing trees and pulling them up after them whenever he looks squiggle-eyed at them." My eloquence had not been wasted. She started considerably and said something about "out of the mouths of babes and sucklings," going on to explain that the gag was not her own, but one of her Uncle Sidney's. And in return I told her that the tenable theory I'd been outlining was not mine, but Jeeves's, each giving credit where credit was due. "I believe he's right, Bertie." "Of course he's right. Jeeves is always right. It's happened before. Do you know Bingo Little?" "Just to say hello to. He married some sort of female novelist, didn't he?" "Rosie M. Banks, author of Mervyn Keane, Clubman, and Only a Factory Girl. And their union was blessed. In due season a bouncing baby was added to the strength. Keep your eye on that baby, for the plot centres round it. Well, since you last saw Bingo, Mrs. Bingo, by using her substantial pull, secured for him the post of editor of Wee Tots, a journal for the nursery and the home. A very good job in most respects, but with this flaw, that the salary attached to it was not all it might have been. His proprietor, P.P. Perkis, being one of those parsimonious birds in whose pocket-books moths nest and raise large families. It was Bingo's constant endeavour, accordingly, to try to stick old Gaspard the miser for a raise. All clear, so far?" "I've got it." Week after week he would creep into P.P. Perkis's presence and falter out apologetic sentences beginning, "Oh, Mr. Perkis, I wonder if," and "Oh, Mr. Perkis, do you think you could possibly?" Only to have the blighter gaze at him with fishy eyes and talk about the tightness of money and the growing cost of pulp paper. And Bingo would say, "Oh, quite, Mr. Perkis," and "I see, Mr. Perkis, yes, I see," and creep out again. Well, that's Act 1.
"But mark the sequel?"
"You're right, mark the sequel. Came a day when Bingo's bouncing baby entered in a baby contest against some of the warmest competition in South Kensington, scooped in the first prize, a handsome all-day sucker, getting kissed in the process by the wife of a cabinet minister, and generally fawned upon by all and sundry. And next morning Bingo, with a strange light on his face,
strode into P.P. Perkis's private office without knocking, banged the desk with his fist and said he wished to see an additional 10 fish in his pay envelope from now on, and to suit everybody's convenience the new arrangement would come into effect on the following Saturday. And when P.P. Perkis started to go into his act, he banged the desk again and said he hadn't come there to argue. "Yes or no, Perkis," he said. And P.P. Perkis, sagging like a wet sock, said, "Why, yes, of course, most certainly, Mr. Little," adding that he had been on the point of suggesting some such idea himself. "Well, I mean, that shows you." It impressed her, no mistaking that. She uttered a meditative "golly," and stood on one leg, looking like the soul's awakening. "And so," I proceeded, "we're going to strain every nerve to see that Esmond Haddock's hunting song is the high spot of the evening. Jeeves is to go about the village, scattering beers, so as to assemble what is known as a clack, and ensure the thunderous applause. You will be able to help in that direction, too." "Of course I will. My standing in the village is terrific. I have the place in my pocket. I must get after this right away. I can't wait. You don't mind me leaving you?" "Not at all, not at all. Or rather, yes, I jolly well do. Before you go, we've got to get this Gussie thing straight." "What Gussie thing?" I clicked the tongue. "You know perfectly well what Gussie thing. For reasons into which we need not go, you have recently been making Augustus Finknottle the plaything of an idle hour, and it's got to stop. I don't have to tell you again what will happen if you continue carrying on as of even date. In our conference at the flat, I made the facts clear to the meanest intelligence. You are fully aware that should the evil spread, should sand be shoved into the gears of the Finknottle-Bassett romance to such an extent that it ceases to tick over, Bertram Wooster will be faced with the fate that is worse than death, viz., marriage. I feel sure that, now that you have been reminded of the hideous peril that looms, your good heart will not allow you to go on encouraging the above Finknottle, as, according to the evidence of 5 aunts, you are doing now. Appalled by the thought of poor old Wooster pressing the wedding trousers and packing the trunks for a honeymoon with that ghastly Bassett, you will obey the dictates of your better self and cool him off." She saw my point. "You want me to restore Gussie to circulation?" "Exactly." "Switch off the fascination? Release him from my clutches?" "That's right." "Why, of course. I'll attend to it immediately." And on these very satisfactory terms we parted. A great weight had been lifted from my mind. Well, I don't know what your experience has been, but mine is that there is very little percentage in having a weight lifted off your mind, because the first thing you know, another, probably a dashed sight heavier, is immediately shoved on. It would appear to be a game you can't beat. I'd scarcely got back to my room, all soothed and relaxed, when in blew Cat's meat, and there was that in his mere appearance that chilled my merry mood, like a slap in the eye with a wet towel. His face was grave, and his deportment not at all the sprightly deportment of a man who has recently been playing gin-rummy with parlour-maids. "Bertie," he said, "hold on tight to something. A very serious situation has arisen." The floor seemed to heave beneath me like a stage sea. The mice, which since that latter sequence and the subsequent chat with Corky had been taking a breather, sprang into renewed activity, as if starting training for some athletic sports. "Oh, my sainted aunt," I moaned, and Catsmeat said I might as well say, "my sainted aunt," because she was the spearhead of the trouble. "Here comes the bruise," he said. "When I was in the servants' hall a moment ago, Silversmith rode in, and do you know what he'd just been told by the girls higher up? He'd been told that your Aunt Agatha is coming here. I don't know when, but in the next day or so. Dame Daphne Winkworth had a letter from her by the afternoon post, and in it she announced her intention of shortly being a pleasant visitor at this ruddy hen coop. So now, what?" Chapter 13. It was a Bertram Wooster with a pale, careworn face, and a marked disposition to start at sudden noises, who sat in his bedroom on the following afternoon, rising occasionally to pace the floor.
Few, seeing him, would have recognized in this limp and shivering chunk of human flotsam the suave, dapper boulevardier of happier years. I was waiting for Catsmeat to return from the metropolis and make his report. Threshing the thing out on the previous evening, we'd not taken long in reaching the conclusion that it would be madness to attempt to cope with this major crisis ourselves, and that the whole conduct of the affair must at the earliest moment be handed over to Jeeves. And as Jeeves was in London, and it might have looked odd for me to dash away from the big house for the night, Catsmeat had gone up to confer with him. He had tooled off secretly in my two-seater, expecting to be back around lunchtime. But lunch had come and gone, the duck and green peas turning to ashes in my mouth, and still no sign of him. It was past 3 when he finally showed up. At the sight of him, my heart, throwing off its burden of care, did a quick, soft shoe dance. No fellow, I reasoned, unless he was bringing good news, could look so like the United States Marines. When last seen driving off on his mission, his air had been sober and downcast, as if he feared that even Jeeves would have to confess himself snookered by this one. He was now gay, bobbish, and bumps-a-daisy. "Sorry I'm late," he said. I had to wait for Jeeves's brain to gather momentum. He was a little slower off the mark than usual. I clutched his arm. "Did he click?" I cried, quivering in every limb. "Oh, yes, he clicked. Jeeves always clicks, but this time only after brooding for what seemed an eternity. I found him in the kitchen at your flat, sipping a cup of tea and reading Spinoza, and put our problem before him, bidding him set the little grey cells in operation without delay, and think of some way of preventing your blasted aunt from fulfilling her evil purpose of coming to invest Deverill Hall." He said he would, and I went back to the sitting-room, where I took a seat, put my feet on the mantelpiece, and thought of Gertrude. From time to time I would rise and look in at the kitchen and ask him how it was coming, but he motioned me away with a silent wave of the hand and let the brain out another notch. Finally he emerged and announced he'd got it. He'd been musing, as always, on the psychology of the individual. What individual? My Aunt Agatha? Naturally, your Aunt Agatha. What other individual's psychology would you have expected him to muse on? Sir Stafford Crips's? He then proceeded to outline a scheme which I think you will agree was a ball of fire. "Tell me, Bertie, have you ever stolen a cub from a tigress?" I said, no, for one reason and another I never had, and he asked me what, if I ever did, I suppose the reactions of the tigress would be, always assuming that she was a good wife and mother. And I said that, while I didn't set myself up as an authority on tigresses, I imagined that she would be as sick as mud. Exactly. And you would expect the animal, the loss of its child having been drawn to its attention, to drop everything and start looking for it, would you not? It would completely revise its social plans, don't you think? If, for instance, it had arranged to visit other tigresses in a nearby cave, it would cancel the date and begin hunting around for clues. You agree? I said yes, I thought that was probable. Well, that is what Jeeves feels will happen in the case of your Aunt Agatha when she learns that her son Thomas has vanished from his school at Bramley-on-Sea. I can't tell you offhand what I'd been expecting, but it certainly wasn't this. Having recovered sufficient breath to enable me to put the question, I asked what it was that he had said, and he repeated his words at dictation speed, and I said, "But dash it!" And he said, "Well, you aren't telling me that Jeeves is going to kidnap young Toss?" He tut-tutted impatiently. "You don't have to kidnap dyed-in-the-wool fans like your cousin Thomas if you inform them that their favourite film star is hoping that they will be able to get away and come and spend a few days at the vicarage where she's staying. That is the message which Jeeves has gone to Bramley-on-Sea to deliver, and I confidently expect it to work like a charm." "You mean he'll run away from school?" "Of course he'll run away from school, like lightning. However, to clinch the thing, I empowered Jeeves in your name to offer a fee of £5 in the event of any hesitation. I gather from Jeeves, in whom he confided, that young Thomas is more than ordinarily out for the stuff just now. He's saving up to buy a camera."
I applauded the shrewd thought, but I didn't think that this introduction of the sordid note would really be necessary. Toss is a boy of volcanic passions, the sort of boy who, if he had but threepence in the world, would spend it on a stamp, writing to Dorothy L'Amour for her autograph. And the message which Catsmeet had outlined would, I felt, be in itself amply sufficient to get him on the move.
Yes, Catsmeet agreed. I think we should shortly have the young fellow with us. But not your Aunt Agatha, who will be occupied elsewhere. It's a pity she has to be temporarily deprived of her cub, of course, and one sympathizes with a mother's anxiety. It would have been nice if the thing could have been arranged some other way, but that's how it goes. One has simply got to say to oneself that into each life some rain must fall.
My own view was that Aunt Agatha wouldn't be anxious so much as hopping mad.
Toss, I said, makes rather a speciality of running away from school. He's done it twice before this, once to attend a cup final and once to go hunting for buried treasure in the Caribbees. And I don't remember Aunt Agatha on either occasion as the stricken mother. Toss was the one who got stricken, 6 of the best on the old spot, he tells me. This, I should imagine, will probably occur again, and I think that even if he takes the assignment on for love alone, I will slip him that £5 as added money.
It would be a graceful act.
After all, what's money? You can't take it with you.
The right spirit.
But isn't Corky going to be a bit at a loss when he suddenly shows up?
Oh, that's all fixed. I met her in the village and told her.
And she approved?
Wholeheartedly. Corky always approves of anything that seems likely to tend to start something.
She's a wonderful girl.
A very admirable character. By the way, she tells me you put in that word in season.
Yes, I thought she seemed braced.
That's how she struck me, too. Odd that she should be so crazy about Esmond Haddock. I've only seen him from a distance, of course, but I should have imagined he would have been a bit on the stiff side for Corky.
Well, he's not really stiff. You should see him relaxing over the port.
Oh, perhaps you're right. And anyway, love's a thing you can't argue about. I suppose it would perplex thousands that Gertrude, bless her, loves me, yet she does. And look at poor little Queenie, heartbroken over the loss of a Rosa I wouldn't be seen in a ditch with. And talking of Queenie, I was thinking of taking her to the pictures in Basingstoke this afternoon, if you'll lend me your car.
Of course.
You feel it would cheer her up? It might, and I should like to slap balm on that wounded spirit if it can be managed. It's curious how, when you're in love, you yearn to go out doing acts of kindness to everybody. I'm bursting with a sort of yeasty benevolence these days, like one of those chaps in Dickens. I very nearly bought you a tie in London. Gosh, who's that? Someone had knocked on the door. "Come in," I said, and Catsmeet dashed at the wardrobe and dashed out festooned in trousers and things, striking the professional note. A silversmith came navigating over the threshold. This majestic man always had in his deportment a suggestion of the ambassador about to deliver important state papers to a reigning monarch. And now the resemblance was heightened by the fact that in front of his ample stomach he was bearing a salver with a couple of telegrams on it. I gathered them in, and he went navigating out again. Catsmeet replaced the trousers. He was quivering a little.
"What effect does that bloke have on you, Bertie?"
he asked in a hushed voice, as if he was speaking in a cathedral. "He paralyzes me. I don't know if you're familiar with the works of Joseph Conrad, but there's a chap in his Lord Jim of whom he says, 'Had you been the Emperor of the East and West, you could not have ignored your inferiority in his presence.' Well, that's Silversmith. He fills me with an awful humility. He shrivels my immortal soul to the size of a parched pea. He's the living image of some of those old-time pros who used to give me such a hell of a time when I first went on the stage. Well, go on. Open them."
"You mean these telegrams?"
"What did you think I meant?"
"Well, they're addressed to Gussie."
"Of course they're addressed to Gussie, but they're for you."
"We don't know that."
"There must be one probably from Jeeves telling you that the balloon has gone up."
"But the other, it may be a tender Bobsworth from Madeline."
"I'll go on."
I was firm. "No, Catsmeet, the code of the Worcesters restrains me. The code of the Worcesters is more rigid than the code of the Catsmeets. A Worcester cannot open a telegram addressed to another, even if for the moment he is that other, if you see what I mean. I'll have to submit them to Gussie."
"All right, if you see it that way. I'll be off then to try to bring a little sunshine into Queenie's life."
He legged it, and I took a seat and went on being firm.
The hour was then 3:45. I continued firm till about 5 minutes to 4. The catch about the code of the Worcesters is that if you start examining it with a couple of telegrams staring you in the face, one of them almost certainly containing news of vital import, you find yourself after a while beginning to wonder if it's really so hot, after all. I mean to say, the thought creeps in that maybe, if one did but know, the Worcesters are priceless asses to let themselves be ruled by a code like that. By 4 o'clock I wasn't quite so firm as I had been. By 10 past my fingers were definitely twitching. It was at 4:15 sharp that I opened the first telegram. As Catsmeat had predicted, it was a cautiously worded communication from Jeeves, handed in at Bramley-on-Sea, and signed Bodger's Stores, guardedly intimating that everything had gone according to plan. The goods, it said, were in transit, and would be delivered in a plain van in the course of the evening. Highly satisfactory. I put a match to it and reduced it to ashes, for you can't be too careful, and having done so was concerned to find, as I looked at the other envelope, that my fingers were still twitching. I took the thing and twiddled it thoughtfully. I can guess what you're going to say. You're going to say that, having perused the first one and mastered its contents, there was no need whatever for me to open the other, and you're perfectly right. But you know how it is. Ask the first lion cub you meet, and it will tell you that once you've tasted blood, there's no pulling up. And it's the same with opening telegrams. Conscience whispered that this one, addressed to Gussie and intended for Gussie, was for Gussie's eyes alone, and I agreed absolutely. But I could no more stop myself opening it than you can stop yourself eating another salted almond. I ripped the envelope, and the quick blush of shame mantled the cheek as my eye caught the signature Madeline. Then my eye caught the rest of the bally thing. It read as follows: Fink Knottle, Deverill Hall, King's Deverill, Hants. Letter received. Cannot understand why not had reassuring telegram. Sure you concealing accident terribly serious. Fever, anxiety, fear worst. Arriving Deverill Hall tomorrow afternoon. Love, kisses, Madeline. Chapter 14. Yes, that was the torpedo that exploded under my bows, and I had the feeling you get sometimes that some practical joker has suddenly removed all the bones from your legs, substituting for them an unsatisfactory jelly. I reread the thing to make sure I'd seen what I thought I'd seen, and finding I had, buried the face in the hands. It was the being without advisers that made the situation so bleak. On these occasions when fate, having biffed you in the eye, proceeds to kick you in the pants, you want to gather the boys about you and thresh things out, and there weren't any boys to gather. Jeeves was in London, Catsmeat in Basingstoke. It made me feel like a Prime Minister who starts to call an important cabinet meeting and finds that the Home Secretary and the Lord President of the Council have nipped over to Paris, and the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries and the rest of the gang are at the dog races. There seemed to be nothing to do but wait till Catsmeat, having sat through the news and the main feature and the two-reel silly symphony, wended homeward. And though reason told me that he couldn't get back for another 2 hours or more, and that even when he did get back it was about 100 to 8 against him having any constructive policy to put forward, I went down to the main gate and paced up and down, scanning the horizon, like Sister What-was-her-name in that story one used to read. The evening was well advanced, and the local birds had long since called it a day, when I spotted the two-seater coming down the road. I flagged it, and Catsmeat applied the brakes. "Oh, hello, Bertie," he said, in a subdued sort of voice, and when he'd alighted and I'd drawn him apart, he explained the reason for his sober deportment. "Most unfortunate," he said, throwing a commiserating glance at the occupant of the other seat, who was staring before her with anguished eyes, and from time to time taking a dab at them with her handkerchief. With these tough films so popular, I suppose I might have foreseen that something like this would happen. The picture was full of cops, scores of cops, racing to and fro, saying, "Oh, so you won't talk." And it was too much for poor little Queenie. Just twisted the knife in the wound, as you might say. She's better now, though still sniffing. I suppose if you went through the W1 postal district of London with a fine tooth comb and a brace of bloodhounds, you wouldn't find more than about 3 men readier than Bertram Wooster to sympathise with a woman's distress. and in ordinary circumstances I would unquestionably have given a low, pitying whistle and said, "Too bad, too bad." But I hadn't time now to mourn over stricken parlourmaids. All the morning at my disposal was earmarked for Worcester B. "Read this," I said. He cocked an eye at me. "Hello?" he said, in what is known as a sardonic manner. "So the code of the Worcesters sprang a leak. I had an idea it would." I think he was about to develop the theme and be pretty dashed humorous at my expense, but at this moment he started to scan the document, and the gist hit him in the eyeball. He said, "This will want a little management." "Yes," I concurred. "It calls for sophisticated handling. We shall have to think this over." "I've been thinking it over for hours." "Yes, but you've got one of those cheap substitute brains which are never any good. It will be different when a man like me starts giving it the cream of his intellect." "If only Jeeves were here." "Yes, we could use Jeeves. It's a pity he's not with us." "And it's a pity," I couldn't help pointing out, though the man of sensibility dislikes rubbing these things in, "that you started the whole trouble by making Gussie wade in the Trafalgar Square fountain." "True, one regrets that. Yet at the time it seemed so right, so inevitable. There he was, and there was the fountain. I felt very strongly that here was an opportunity which might not occur again, and while I would be the last to deny that the aftermath hasn't been too good, it was certainly value for money. A man who has seen Gussie Fink Nottle chasing newts in the Trafalgar Square fountain in correct evening costume at 5 o'clock in the morning is a man who has lived. He's got something he can tell his grandchildren. But if we are apportioning the blame, we can go further back than that. Where the trouble started was when you insisted on me giving him dinner. Madness. You might have known something would crack." "Well, it's no good talking about it." "No, action is what we want. Sharp, decisive action as dished out by Napoleon. I suppose you will shortly be going in and dressing for dinner." "I suppose so." "How soon after dinner will you be in your room?" "As soon as I can jolly well manage it." "Expect me there, then, probably with a whole plan of campaign, cut and dried. And now I really must be getting back to Queenie. She will be on duty before long, and we want to powder her nose and remove the tear stains. Poor little soul. If you knew how my heart bleeds for that girl, Bertie, you would shudder." And of course, it being so vital that we should get together with a minimum of delay, that night turned out to be the one night when it was impossible to take an early powder. Instead of the ordinary dinner, a regular binge had been arranged, with guests from all over the countryside. No fewer than 10 of Hampshire's more prominent stiffs had been summoned to the trough, and they stuck on like limpets, long after any competent chucker-out would have bounced them. No doubt, if you have gone to the sweat of driving 20 miles to a house to dine, you don't feel like just snatching a chop and dashing off. You hang on for the musical evening and the drinks at 10:30. Be that as it may, it wasn't till close on midnight that the final car rolled away, and when I bounded to my room, off duty at last, there was no sign of cat's meat. There was, however, a note from him lying on the pillow, and I tore it open with a feverish flick of the finger. It was dated 11 p.m., and its tone was reproachful. He rebuked me for what he described as sitting, gorging and swilling with my fine friends, when I ought to have been at the conference table doing a bit of honest work. He asked me if I thought he was going to remain seated on his fanny in my damned room all night, and hoped that I would have a hangover next day as well as indigestion from too much rich food. He couldn't wait any longer, he said, it being his intention to take my car and drive to London so as to be at Wimbledon Common bright and early tomorrow morning for an interview with Madeline Bassett. And at that interview, he went on, concluding on a cheerier note, he would fix everything up just the same as Mother makes it, for he'd got the idea of a lifetime, an idea so superb that I could set my mind, if I called it a mind, completely at rest. He doubted, he said, whether Jeeves himself, even if full to the brim of fish, could have dug up a better modus operandi. Well, this was comforting, of course, always provided that one could accept the theory that he was as good as he thought he was. You never know with cat's meat. In one of his school reports, which I happened to see while prowling about the Reverend Aubrey Upjohn's study one night in search of biscuits, the Rev Aubrey had described him as brilliant but unsound, and if ever a headmaster with a face like a cassowary rang the bell and entitled himself to receive a cigar or a coconut, this headmaster was that headmaster. However, I will own that his communication distinctly eased the spirit. It is a pretty well-established fact that the heart bowed down with weight of woe to weakest hope will cling. And that's what mine did. It was in quite an uplifted frame of mind that I shed the soup and fish and climbed into the slumber where, I rather think, though I wouldn't swear to it, that I sang a bar or two of a recent song hit. I had just donned the dressing gown and was preparing for a final cigarette when the door opened and Gussie came in. Gussie was in peevish mood. He hadn't liked the stiffs, and he complained with a good deal of bitterness at having had to waste in their society an evening which might have been spent chez Corky. "You couldn't oil out of a big dinner party," I urged. "No, that's what Corky said. She said it wouldn't do. Noblesse oblige was one of the expressions she used. Amazing what high principles she has. You don't often find a girl as pretty as that with such high principles. And how pretty she is, isn't she, Bertie? Or rather, when I say pretty, I mean angelically lovely." I agreed that Corky's face wouldn't stop a clock, and he retorted warmly, what did I mean it wouldn't stop a clock? "She's divine. She's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. It seems so extraordinary that she should be Pirbright's sister. You would think any sister of Pirbright's would be as repulsive as he is." "Oh, I'd call Catsmeat rather good-looking." "I disagree with you. He's a hellhound, and it comes out in his appearance. There are newts in that fountain, Gussie," he said to me. "Get after them without a second's delay, and wouldn't take no for an answer. Urged me on with sharp hunting cries. 'Yoicks,' he said, and 'tally-ho.' But what I came about, Bertie," said Gussie, breaking off abruptly, as if this dip into the past pained him, "was to ask if you would lend me that tie of yours with the pink lozenges on the dove-grey background. I shall be dropping in at the vicarage tomorrow morning, and I want to look my best." Apart from the fleeting thought that he was a bit of an optimist if he expected a tie with pink lozenges on a dove-grey background to undo nature's handiwork to the extent of making him look anything but a fish-faced gargoyle, my reaction to these words was a feeling of profound relief that I'd had that talk with Corky, and obtained her promise that she would lose no time in choking Gussie off and putting him on the ice. For it was plain that there was no time to be lost. Every word this superheated newt fancier uttered showed more clearly the extent to which he had got it up his nose. Chatting with Augustus Fink Nottle about Corky was like getting the inside from Mark Antony on the topic of Cleopatra, and every second he spent out of the Frigidaire was fraught with peril. It was only too plain that the Larches, Wimbledon Common, had ceased to mean a thing in his life, and instead of being a holy shrine housing the girl of his dreams, had become just an address in the suburban telephone book. I gave him the tie, and he thanked me and started out. "Oh, by the way," he said, pausing at the door, "you remember pestering me to write to Madeline? Well, I've done it. I wrote to her this afternoon. Why are you looking like a dying duck?" I was looking like a dying duck because I had, of course, instantly spotted the snag. What, I was asking myself, was Madeline Bassett going to think when on top of the letter about the sprained wrist she'd got in one in Gussie's handwriting, with no reference in it whatever to runaway horses and completely silent on the theme of golden-haired children with lisps? I revealed to Gussie the recent activities of the Catsmeat Worcester duo, and he frowned disapprovingly. "Most officious," he said, "writing people's love letters for them, and not in the best of taste. However," he proceeded, "it doesn't really matter, because what I said in my letter was that everything was off." I tottered and would have fallen, had I not clutched at a passing chest of drawers. "Off!" "I've broken the engagement. I've been feeling for some days now that Madeline, though a nice girl, won't do. My heart belongs to Corky. Good night again, Bertie. Thanks for the tie." He withdrew, humming a sentimental ballad. Chapter 15. The Larches, Wimbledon Common, was one of those eligible residences standing in commodious grounds with company's own water, both H&C, and the usual domestic offices and all that sort of thing, which you pass on the left as you drive out of London by way of Putney Hill. I don't know who own these joints, though obviously citizens who have got the stuff in sackfuls, and I didn't know who owned the Larches. All I knew was that Gussie's letter to Madeline Bassett would be arriving at that address by the first postal delivery, and it was my intention, should the feat prove to be within the scope of human power, to intercept and destroy it. In tampering with His Majesty's mails in this manner, I had an idea that I was rendering myself liable to about 40 years in the coop, but the risk seemed to me well worth taking. After all, 40 years soon pass, and only by preventing that letter reaching its destination could I secure the bit of breathing space so urgently needed in order to enable me to turn round and think things over. That was why, on the following morning, the commodious grounds of the Larches, in addition to a lawn, a summer house, a pond, flower beds, bushes, and an assortment of trees, contained also one Worcester, noticeably cold about the feet and inclined to rise from 12 to 18 inches skywards every time an early bird gave a sudden cheep over its worm. This Worcester to whom I allude was crouching in the interior of a bush, not far from the French windows of what, unless the architect had got the place all cock-eyed, was the dining room. He had run up from King's Deverill on the 2:54 milk train. I say run, but perhaps sauntered would be more the mot juste. When milk moves from spot to spot, it takes its time, and it was not until very nearly 0 hour that I'd sneaked in through the gates and got into position 1. By the time I'd wedged myself into my bush, the sun was high up in the sky, as Esmond Haddock's Aunt Charlotte would have said, and I found myself musing, as I have so often had occasion to do, on the callous way in which nature refuses to chip in and do its bit when the human heart is in the soup. Though howling hurricanes and driving rainstorms would have been a more suitable accompaniment to the run of the action, the morning, or morn, if you prefer to string along with Aunt Charlotte, was bright and fair. My nervous system was seriously disordered, and one of God's less likeable creatures with about 114 legs had crawled down the back of my neck and was doing its daily dozen on the sensitive skin. But did nature care? Not a hoot. The sky continued blue, and the fat-headed sun, which I've mentioned, shone smilingly throughout. Beetles on the spine are admittedly bad, calling for all that a man has of fortitude and endurance, but when embarking on an enterprise which involved parking the carcass in bushes, one more or less budgets for beetles. What was afflicting me much more than the activities of the undersigned was the reflection that I didn't know what was going to happen when the postman arrived. It might quite well be, I felt, that everybody at the Larches fed in bed of a morning, in which event a maid would take Gussie's bit of trinitrotoluol up to Madeline's room on a tray, thus rendering my schemes null and void. It was just as this morale-lowering thought came into my mind that something suddenly bumped against my leg, causing the top of my head to part from its moorings. My initial impression that I'd been set upon by a powerful group of enemies lasted, though it seemed a year, for perhaps 2 seconds. Then, the spots clearing from before my eyes and the world ceasing to do the adagio dance into which it had broken, I was able to perceive that all that had come into my life was a medium-sized ginger cat. Breathing anew, as the expression is, I bent down and tickled it behind the ear, such being my invariable policy when closeted with cats, and was still tickling when there was a bang and a rattle, and somebody threw back the windows of the dining room. Shortly afterwards the front door opened, and a housemaid came out onto the steps and started shaking a mat, in a languid sort of way. Able now to see into the dining room, and observing that the table was laid for the morning meal, I found my thoughts taking a more optimistic turn. Madeline Bassett, I told myself, was not the girl to remain sluggishly in bed while others rose. If the gang took their chow downstairs, she would be with them. One of those plates now under my inspection, therefore, was her plate, and beside it the fateful letter would soon be deposited. A swift dash, and I should be able to get my hooks on it before she came down. I limbered up the muscles, so as to be ready for instant action, and was on my toes and all set to go when there was a whistle to the southwest, and a voice said, "Ooh, ooh," and I saw that the postman had arrived. He was standing at the foot of the steps, giving the housemaid the eye. "Hello, beautiful," he said. I didn't like it. My heart sank. Now that I could see this postman steadily and see him whole, he stood out without disguise as a jaunty young postman, lissom of limb, and a mass of sex appeal, the sort of postman who, when off duty, is a devil of a fellow at the local hops, and when engaged on his professional rounds, considers the day wasted that doesn't start with about 10 minutes intensive flirtation with the nearest domestic handy. I had been hoping for something many years older and much less the society playboy. With a fellow like this at the helm, the delivery of the first post was going to take time, and every moment that passed made more probable the arrival on the scene of Madeline Bassett and others. My fears were well founded. The minutes went by, and still this gay young postman stood rooted to the spot, dishing out the brilliant badinage as if he were some carefree gentleman of leisure who was just passing by in the course of an early morning stroll. It seemed to me monstrous that a public servant, whose salary I helped to pay, should be wasting the government's time in this frivolous manner, and it wouldn't have taken much time to make me write a strong letter to the Times about it. Eventually, awakening to a sense of his obligations, he handed over a wad of correspondence, and with a final sally went on his way, and the housemaid disappeared, to manifest herself a few moments later in the dining-room. There, having read a couple of postcards in rather a bored way, as if she found little in them to grip an interest, she did what she ought to have done at least a quarter of an hour earlier, viz., placed them and the letters beside the various plates. I perked up. Things, I felt, were moving. What would happen now, I assumed, was that she would pop off and go about her domestic duties, leaving the terrain unencumbered. And it was with something of the emotions of the war horse that saith, "Ha!" among the trumpets, that I once more braced the muscles. Ignoring the cat, which was weaving in and out between my legs with a camaraderie in its manner that suggested that it had now got me definitely taped as God's gift to the animal kingdom of Wimbledon, I made ready for the leap. Picture, then, my chagrin and agony of spirit when, instead of hoofing it out of the door, this undisciplined housemaid came through the window, and having produced a gasper, stood leaning against the wall, puffing luxuriously and gazing dreamily at the sky, as if thinking of postmen. I don't know anything more sickening than being baffled by an unforeseen stymie at the 11th hour, and it would not be overstating it to say that I writhed with impotent fury. As a rule, my relations with housemaids are cordial and sympathetic. If I meet a housemaid, I beam at her and say, "Good morning," and she beams at me and says, "Good morning," and all is joy and peace. But this one I would gladly have socked on the napper with a brick. I stood there cursing, she stood there smoking. How long I cursed and she smoked, I couldn't say. But I was just wondering if this degrading exhibition was going on forever when she suddenly leaped, looked hastily over her shoulder, and, hurling the gasper from her, legged it round the side of the house. The whole thing rather reminiscent of a nymph surprised while bathing. And it wasn't long before I was able to spot what had caused her concern. I had thought for a moment that the voice of conscience must have whispered in her ear, but this was not so. Somebody was coming out of the front door, and my heart did a quick double somersault as I saw that it was Madeline Bassett. And I was just saying, "This is the end," for it seemed inevitable that in another 2 ticks she would be inside the dining-room absorbing the latest news from Deverell Hall, when my joie de vivre, which had hit a new low, was restored by the sight of her turning to the left instead of the right. And I perceived, what had failed to register in that first awful moment, that she was carrying a basket and gardening scissors. One sprang to the conclusion that she was off for a bit of pre-breakfast nosegay gathering, and one was right. She disappeared, and I was alone once more with the cat. There is, as Jeeves rather neatly put it once, a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune, and I could see clearly enough that this was it. What is known as the crucial moment had unquestionably arrived, and any knowledgeable adviser, had such a one been present, would have urged me to make it snappy and get moving while the going was good. But recent events had left me weak. The spectacle of Madeline Bassett so close to me that I could have tossed a pebble into her mouth, not that I would, of course, had had the effect of numbing the sinews. I was, for the nonce, a spent force, incapable even of kicking the cat, which, possibly under the impression that this rigid Bertram was a tree, had now started to sharpen its claws on my leg. And it was lucky I was.
A spent force, I mean, not a tree. For at that very moment when, had I had the horsepower, I would have been sailing through the dining-room window, a girl came out of it carrying a white, woolly dog. And a nice ass I should have looked if I'd taken at the flood, the tide, which leads on to fortune. Because it wouldn't have led on to fortune or anything like it. It would have resulted in a nasty collision on the threshold. She was a solid, hefty girl, of the type which plays 5 sets of tennis without turning a hair. And from the fact that her face was sombre and her movements on the listless side, I deduced that this must be Madeline Bassett's school friend, the one whose sex life had recently stubbed its toe. Too bad, of course, and one was sorry that she and the dream man hadn't been able to make a go of it. But at the moment I wasn't thinking very much about her troubles, my attention being riveted on the disturbing fact that I was dished. Thanks to the delay caused by the dilatory methods of that sprightly young postman, my plan of campaign was a total loss. I couldn't possibly start to function with solid girls cluttering up the fairway. There was but one hope. Her demeanour was that of a girl about to take the dog for a run, and it might be that she and friend would wander far enough afield to enable me to bring the thing off. I was just speculating on the odds for and against this when she put the dog on the ground, and with indescribable emotion I saw that it was heading straight for my bush, and in another moment would be noting contents and barking its head off. For no dog, white or not white, woolly or not woolly, accepts with a mere raised eyebrow the presence of strangers in bushes. The thing, I felt, might quite possibly culminate not only in exposure, disgrace and shame, but in a quick nip on the ankle. It was the cat who eased a tense situation, possibly because it had not yet breakfasted and wished to do so, or it may be because the charm of Bertram Wooster's society had at last begun to pall. It selected this moment to leave me. It turned on its heel and emerged from the bush with its tail in the air, and the white, woolly dog, sighting it, broke into a canine version of Aunt Charlotte's "A Hunting We Will Go" song, and with a brief "Hello, hello, hello, hello," went a-hunting. The pursuit rolled away over brake and over thorn, with Madeline Bassett's school friend bringing up the rear. Position at the turn: 1, cat; 2, dog; 3, Madeline Bassett's school friend. The leaders were well up in a bunch. Several lengths separated 2 and 3. I did not linger and dally. All a passer-by, had there been a passer-by, would have seen was a sort of blur. 10 seconds later I was standing beside the breakfast table, panting slightly with Gussie's letter in my hand. To trouser it was with me the work of an instant. To reach the window with a view to the quick getaway, that of an instant more. And I was on the point of passing through in the same old bustling way, when I suddenly perceived the solid girl returning with the white woolly dog in her arms, and I saw what must have happened. These white woolly dogs lack staying power, all right for the quick sprint, but hopeless across country. This one must have lost the hallo, hallo spirit in the first 50 yards or so, and pausing for breath, allowed itself to be gathered in. In moments of peril, the Woosters act swiftly. One way out being barred to me, I decided in a flash to take the other. I nipped through the door, nipped across the hall, and still nipping, reached the temporary safety of the room on the other side of it. Chapter 16. The room in which I found myself was bright and cheerful, in which respect it differed substantially from Bertram Wooster. It had the appearance of being the den or snuggery of some female interested in sports and pastimes, and was, I assumed, the headquarters of Madeline Bassett's solid school friend. There was an oar over the mantelpiece, a squash racket over the bookshelf, and on the walls a large number of photographs which even at a cursory glance I was able to identify as tennis and hockey groups. A cursory glance was all I was at leisure to bestow upon them at the moment, for the first thing to which my eye had been attracted on my entry was a serviceable French window, and I made for it like a man on a walking tour, diving into a village pub 2 minutes before closing time. It opened on a sunken garden at the side of the house, and offered an admirable avenue of escape to one whose chief object in life was to detach himself from this stately home of Wimbledon, and never set eyes on the bally place again. When I say that it offered an admirable avenue of escape, it would be more correct to put it that it would have done, had there not been standing immediately outside it, leaning languidly on a spade,
A short, stout gardener in corduroy trousers and a red and yellow cap, which suggested, erroneously I imagine, that he was a member of the Maryland Cricket Club. His shirt was brown, his boots black, his face cerise, and his whiskers grey. I am able to supply this detailed record of the colour scheme, because for some considerable time I stood submitting this son of toil to a close inspection, and the closer I inspected him, the less I found myself liking the fellow. Just as I had felt my spirit out of tune with the gasper-smoking housemaid of the Larches, so did I now look askance at the establishment's gardener, feeling very strongly that what he needed was 1.5 pounds of dynamite exploded under his fat trouser seat. Presently, unable to stand the sight of him any longer, I turned away and began to pace the room like some caged creature of the wild. The only difference being that whereas a caged creature of the wild would not have bumped into and come within a touch of upsetting a small table with a silver cup, a golf ball in a glass case, and a large framed photograph on it, I did. It was only by an outstanding feat of legerdemain that I succeeded in catching the photograph as it fell, thereby averting a crash which would have brought every inmate of the house racing to the spot. And having caught it, I saw that it was a speaking likeness of Madeline Bassett. It was one of those full-face speaking likenesses. She was staring straight out of the picture with large, sad, saucer-like eyes, and the lips seemed to quiver with a strange, reproachful appeal. And as I gazed at those sad eyes and took a square look at those quivery lips, something went off inside my being like a spring. I had had an inspiration. Events were to prove that my idea, like about 94% of cat's meats, was just one of those that seemed good at the time. But at the moment I was convinced that if I were to snitch this studio portrait and confront Gussie with it, bidding him drink it in and let conscience be his guide, all would be well. Remorse would creep in, his better self would get it up the nose, and all the old love and affection would come surging back. I believe this sort of thing frequently happens. Burglars, catching sight of photographs of their mothers, instantly turn in their tools and resolve to lead a new life, and the same is probably true of footpads, con men, and fellows who have not paid their dog license. I saw no reason to suppose that Gussie would be slower off the mark. It was at this moment that I heard the sound of a hoover being wheeled along the hall, and realized that the housemaid was on her way to do the room. If there's anything that makes you feel more like a stag at bay than being in a room where you oughtn't to be, and hearing housemaids coming to do it, I don't know what is. If you describe Bertram Wooster at this juncture as all of a doodah, you would not be going far astray. I sprang to the window. The gardener was still there. I sprang back and nearly knocked the table over again. Finally, thinking quick, I sprang sideways. My eye had been caught by a substantial sofa in the corner of the room, and I could have wished no more admirable cover. I was behind it with perhaps 2 seconds to spare. To say that I now breathed freely again would be putting it perhaps too strongly. I was still far from being at my ease. But I did feel that in this little nook of mine I ought to be reasonably secure. One of the things you learn when you've knocked about the world a bit is that housemaids don't sweep behind sofas. Having run the hoover over the exposed portions of the carpet, they consider the day well spent and go off and have a cup of tea and a slice of bread and jam. On the present occasion, even the exposed portions of the carpet did not get their doing, for scarcely had the girl begun to ply the apparatus when she was called off the job by orders from up top. "Morning, Jane," said a voice, which, from the fact that it was accompanied by a shrill bark, such as could have proceeded only from a white woolly dog, I took to be that of the solid school friend. "Never mind about doing the room now." "No, miss," said the housemaid, seeming well pleased with the idea, and pushed off, no doubt to have another gasper in the scullery. There followed a rustling of paper as the solid girl, seating herself on the sofa, skimmed through the morning journal. Then I heard her say, "Oh, hello, Madeline," and was aware that the Bassett was with us. "Good morning, Hilda," said the Bassett in that soupy, treacly voice which had got her so disliked by all right-thinking men. "What a lovely, lovely morning." The solid girl said she didn't see what was so particularly hot about it, adding that personally she found all mornings foul. She spoke morosely, and I could see that her disappointment in love had soured her, poor soul.
I mourned for her distress, and had the circumstances been different, might have reached up and patted her on the head.
"I have been gathering flowers," proceeded the Basset. "Beautiful, smiling flowers, all wet with the morning dew. How happy flowers are, Hilda."
The solid girl said, "Why shouldn't they? What have they got to beef about?" And there was a pause. The solid girl said something about the prospects of the Surrey Cricket Club, but received no reply. And a moment later it was evident that Madeline Bassett's thoughts had been elsewhere.
"I've just been in the dining room,"
she said, and one spotted the tremor in the voice.
"There was no letter from Gussie. I'm so worried, Hilda. I think I shall go down to Deverell by an earlier train."
"Suit yourself."
"I can't help having an awful feeling that he is seriously injured. He said he had only sprained his wrist, but has he? That is what I ask myself. Suppose the horse knocked him down and trampled on him."
"He'd have mentioned it."
"But he wouldn't. That's what I mean. Gussie is so unselfish and considerate. His first thought would be to spare me anxiety. Oh, Hilda, do you think his spine is fractured?"
"What rot! Spine fractured my foot. If there isn't a letter, all it means is that this other fellow, what's his name, Worcester, has kicked at acting as an amanuensis. I don't blame him. He's dippy about you, isn't he?"
"He loves me very, very dearly. It's a tragedy. I can't describe to you, Hilda, the pathos of that look of dumb suffering in his eyes when we meet."
"Well, then, the thing's obvious. If you're dippy about a girl and another fellow has grabbed her, it can't be pleasant to sit at a writing table, probably with a rotten pen, sweating away while the other fellow dictates. My own, comma, precious darling, period. I worship you, comma. I adore you, period. How I wish, comma, my dearest, comma, that I could press you to my bosom and cover your lovely face with burning kisses, exclamation mark. I don't wonder Worcester kicked."
"You're very heartless, Hilda."
"I've had enough to make me heartless. I've sometimes thought of ending it all. I've got a gun in that drawer there."
"Hilda."
"Oh, I don't suppose I shall. Lot of fuss and trouble. Have you seen the paper this morning? It says there's some talk of altering the leg before wicket rule again. Odd how your outlook changes when your heart's broken. I can remember a time when I'd have been all excited if they altered the leg before wicket rule. Now I don't give a damn. Let 'em alter it, and I hope they have a fine day for it. What sort of a fellow is this Worcester?"
"Oh, a dear."
"He must be if he writes Gussie's love letters for him. Either that or a perfect sap. If I were in your place, I'd give Gussie the air and sign up with him. Being a man, I presume he's a louse like all other men, but he's rich, and money's the only thing that matters." From the way Madeline said,
"Oh, Hilda, darling,"
the wealth of reproach in the voice, I mean, and all that sort of thing, I could tell that these cynical words had got in amongst her, shocking her and wounding her finer feelings, and I found myself in complete accord with her attitude. I thoroughly disapproved of this girl and her whole outlook, and wished she wouldn't say things like that. The position of affairs was black enough already without having old school friends egging Madeline Bassett on to give Gussie the air and sign up with me. I think that Madeline would have gone on to chide and rebuke, but at this point, instead of speaking, she suddenly uttered a squeal or wordless exclamation, and the solid girl said, "Now what?"
"My photograph."
"What about it?"
"Where is it?"
"On the table."
"But it's not, it's gone."
"Then I suppose Jane has smashed it. She always does smash everything that isn't made of sheet iron, and I see no reason why she should have made an exception in favour of your photograph. You'd better go and ask her."
"I will,"
said Madeline, and I heard her hurrying out. A few moments passed, self-inhaling fluff, and the solid girl presumably scanning her paper for further facts about the leg before wicket rule. And then I heard her say, "Sit still," no doubt addressing the white woolly dog, for shortly afterwards she said, "Oh, all right, blast you, buzz off if you want to." And there was a thud, not a dull, sickening thud, but the sort of thud a white woolly dog makes when landing on a carpet from a sofa of medium height. And it was almost immediately after this that there came a sound of sniffing in my vicinity, and with a considerable lowering of the already low morale, I realized that the animal must have picked up the characteristic Worcester smell, and was now in the process of tracking it to its source. And so it proved. Glancing round, I suddenly found its face about 6 inches from mine, its demeanour that of a dog that can hardly believe its eyes. Backing away with a startled "whoops," it retreated to the centre of the room and began barking. "What's the matter, you silly ass?" said the solid girl, and then there was a silence. On her part, that is. The white, woolly dog continued to strain its vocal cords. Madeline Bassett re-entered.
"Jane says,"
she began, then broke off with a piercing scream.
"Hilda! Oh, Hilda, what are you doing with that pistol?"
The solid girl calmed her fears, though leaving mine in status quo. "Don't get excited. I'm not going to shoot myself, though it would be a pretty good idea at that. There's a man behind the sofa."
"Hilda!"
"I've been wondering for some time where that curious breathing sound was coming from. Percy's spotted him. Attaboy, Percy. Nice work. Come on out of it, you." Rightly concluding that she meant me, I emerged, and Madeline uttered another of her piercing screams. "A dressy criminal, though shop-soiled," said the solid girl, scrutinizing me over the young cannon which she was levelling at my waistcoat. "One of those Mayfair men you read about, I suppose. Hello, I see he's got that photograph you were looking for. And probably half a dozen other things as well. I think the first move is to make him turn out his pockets." The thought that in one of those pockets lay Gus's letter caused me to reel and utter a strangled cry, and the solid girl said if I was going to have a fit, that was all right with her, but she would be obliged if I would step through the window and have it outside. It was at this point that Madeline Bassett most fortunately found speech. During the preceding exchanges, if you can call it exchanges when one person has taken the floor and is doing all the talking, she had been leaning against the wall with a hand to her heart, giving an impersonation, and not at all a bad one either, of a cat with a herringbone in its throat. She now made her first contribution to the dialogue.
"Bertie!"
she cried. The solid girl seemed puzzled. "Bertie?"
"This is Bertie Wooster."
"The complete letter-writer? Well, what's he doing here, and why has he swiped your photograph?" Madeline's voice sank to a tremulous whisper.
"I think I know."
"Then you're smarter than I am. Goofy, the whole proceeding strikes me as."
"Will you leave us, Hilda? I want to speak to Bertie. Alone."
"Righto. I'll be shifting along to the dining room. I don't suppose, feeling the way I do, there's a dog's chance of my being able to swallow a mouthful, but I can be counting the spoons." The solid girl pushed off, accompanied by the white woolly dog, leaving us all set for a tete-a-tete, which I for one would willingly have avoided. In fact, though it would of course have been a near thing, with not much in it either way, I think I would have preferred a tete-a-tete with Dame Daphne Winkworth. Chapter 17. The proceedings opened with one of those long, sticky silences which give you the same unpleasant feeling you get when you let them rope you in to play Bulstrode a butler in amateur theatricals and you go on and find you've forgotten your opening lines. She was standing gazing at me as if I'd been a photographer about to squeeze the bulb and take a studio portrait in sepia and silver-grey wash. And after a while it seemed to me that it was about time one of us said something. The great thing on these occasions is to get the conversation going. "Nice day," I said. "I thought I'd look in." She enlarged the eyes a bit, but did not utter, so I proceeded. "Now, it occurred to me that you might be glad to have the latest bulletin about Gussie, so I popped up on the milk train. Gussie, I am glad to say, is getting along fine. The wrist is still stiff, but the swelling is subsiding and there is no pain. He sends his best." She remained sotto voce, and the silent tomb, and I carried on. I thought a word or two touching upon my recent activities might now be in order. I mean, you can't just come bounding up from behind the furniture and let it go at that. You have to explain and clarify your motives. Girls like to know these things. "You're probably asking yourself," I said, "what I was doing behind that sofa. I parked myself there on a sudden whim. You know how one gets these sudden whims. And you may be thinking it a bit odd that I should be going around with this studio portrait in my possession. Well, I'll tell you. I happened to see it on the table there, and I took it to give to Gussie. I thought he would like to have it, to buck him up in your absence. He misses you sorely, of course, and it occurred to me that it would be nice for him to shove it on the dressing table and study it from time to time. No doubt he already has several of these speaking likenesses, but a fellow can always do with one more."
Not too bad, it seemed to me, considering that the material had to be thrown together rather against time, and I was hoping for the bright smile and the cordial, "Why, yes, to be sure, a capital idea." Instead of which she waggled her head in a slow, mournful sort of way, and a teardrop stood in her eye. "Oh, Bertie," she said. I've always found it difficult to think of just the right comeback when people say, "Oh, Bertie," to me. My Aunt Agatha is always doing it, and she has me stymied every time. I found myself stymied now. It is true that this "Oh, Bertie" of the Bassets differed in many respects from Aunt Agatha's "Oh, Bertie," its tone being one of soupiness rather than asperity, but the effect was the same. I stood there, at a loss. "Oh, Bertie," she said again, "do you read Rosie M. Banks's novels?" she asked. I was a bit surprised at her changing the subject like this, but equally relieved. A talk about current literature I felt might ease the strain. These booksy chats often do. "Not very frequently," I said. "They sell like hot cakes, Bingo tells me." "You have not read Mervyn Keane, Clubman?" "No, I missed that. Good stuff." "It is very, very beautiful." "I must put it on my library list." "You are sure you have not read it?" "Oh, quite. As a matter of fact, I've always steered rather clear of Mrs. Bingo's stuff. Why?" "It seemed such an extraordinary coincidence. Shall I tell you the story of Mervyn Keane?" "Do." She took time out to gulp a bit, then she carried on in a low voice with a goodish amount of throb to it. "He was young and rich and handsome, an officer in the Coldstream Guards, and the idol of all who knew him. Everybody envied him." "I don't wonder, the lucky stiff." "But he was not really to be envied. There was a tragedy in his life. He loved Cynthia Grey, the most beautiful girl in London, but just as he was about to speak his love, he found that she was engaged to Sir Hector Morleverer, the explorer. Dangerous devils, these explorers. You want to watch them like hawks. In these cirques, of course, he would have refrained from speaking his love. Kept it under his hat, I suppose. What?" "Yes, he spoke no word of love, but he went on worshipping her, outwardly gay and cheerful, inwardly gnawed by a ceaseless pain. And then one night her brother Lionel, a wild young man who had unfortunately got into bad company, came to his rooms and told him that he had committed a very serious crime and was going to be arrested. And he asked Mervyn to save him by taking the blame himself. And of course Mervyn said he would." "The silly ass! Why?" "For Cynthia's sake, to save her brother from imprisonment and shame." "But it meant going to Chokey himself. I suppose he overlooked that." "No, Mervyn fully realized what must happen, but he confessed to the crime and went to prison. When he came out, grey and broken, he found that Cynthia had married Sir Hector, and he went out to the South Sea Islands and became a beachcomber. And time passed, and then one day Cynthia and her husband arrived at the island on their travels and stayed at Government House, and Mervyn saw her drive by, and she was just as beautiful as ever, and their eyes met, but she didn't recognize him, because of course he had a beard and his face was changed, because he'd been living the pace that kills, trying to forget." I remembered a good one I'd read somewhere about the pace that kills nowadays being the slow, casual walk across a busy street, but I felt that this was not the moment to spring it. "He found out that she was leaving next morning, and he had nothing to remember her by. So he broke into Government House in the night and took from her dressing-table the rose that she'd been wearing in her hair. And Cynthia found him taking it, and of course she was very upset when she recognized him." "Oh, she recognized him this time. He'd shaved, had he?" "No, he still wore his beard, but she knew him when he spoke her name. And there was a very powerful scene in which he told her how he'd always loved her, and had come to steal her rose, and she told him that her brother had died, and confessed on his deathbed that it was he who had been guilty of the crime for which Mervyn had gone to prison. And then Sir Hector came in.
Good situation. Strong.
And of course he thought Mervyn was a burglar, and he shot him. And Mervyn died with the rose in his hand. And of course the sound of the shot roused the house, and the governor came running in and said, "Is anything missing?" And Cynthia, in a low, almost inaudible voice, said, "Only a rose." That is the story of Mervyn Keene, clubman.
Well, it was difficult, of course, to know quite what comment to make. I said, "Oh, ah." But I felt at the time that it could have been improved on. The fact is, I was feeling a bit stunned. I'd always known in a sort of vague, general way that Mrs. Bingo wrote the world's worst tripe. Bingo generally changes the subject nervously if anyone mentions the little woman's output. But I had never supposed her capable of bilge like this. But the Bassets speedily took my mind off literary criticism. She had resumed her saucer-like stare, and the teardrop in the eye was now more noticeable than ever. "Oh, Bertie," she said, and her voice, like Cynthia's, was low and almost inaudible. "I ought to have given you my photograph long ago. I blame myself. But I thought it would be too painful for you, too sad a reminder of all that you had lost. I see now that I was wrong. You found the strain too great to bear. At all costs you had to have it. So you stole into the house, like Mervyn Keene, and took it." "What?"
"Yes, Bertie. There need be no pretences between you and me. And don't think I'm angry. I'm touched, more deeply touched than I can say, and oh, so sorry. How sad life is."
I was with her there. "You betcha," I said.
"You saw my friend Hilda Gudgeon. There is another tragedy. Her whole happiness has been ruined by a wretched quarrel with the man she loves, a man called Harold Anstruther. They were playing in the mixed doubles in a tennis tournament not long ago, and, according to her, I don't understand tennis very well, he insisted on hogging the game, as she calls it. I think she means that when the ball came near her and she was going to strike it, he rushed across and struck it himself, and this annoyed her very much. She complained to him, and he was very rude and said she was a rabbit and had better leave everything to him. And she broke off the engagement directly the game was finished. And now she is broken-hearted."
I must say she didn't sound very broken-hearted. Just as the Basset said these words, there came from without the uproar of someone singing, and I identified the voice as that of the solid school friend. She was rendering that old number, "Give Yourself a Pat on the Back," and the general effect was of an exhilarated foghorn. The next moment she came leaping into the room, and I've never seen anything more radiant. If she hadn't had the white woolly dog in her arms, I wouldn't have recognized the sombre female of so short a while ago. "Hi, Madeline," she cried. "What do you think I found on the breakfast table? A grovelling letter from the boyfriend, no less. He's surrendered unconditionally. He says he must have been mad to call me a rabbit. He says he can never forgive himself, but can I forgive him? Well, I can answer that one. I'm going to forgive him the day after tomorrow, not earlier, because we must have discipline."
"Oh, Hilda, how glad I am."
"I'm pretty pleased about it myself. Good old Harold. A king among men, but of course needs keeping in his place from time to time, and has to be taught what's what. But I mustn't run on about Harold. What I came to tell you was that there's a fellow outside in a car who says he wants to see you."
"To see me?"
"So he says. Name of Pirbright." Madeline turned to me.
"Why, it must be your friend Claude Pirbright, Bertie. I wonder what he wants. I'd better go and see."
She threw a quick glance at the solid girl, and seeing that she had stepped through the French window, no doubt to give the gardener the devil about something, came to me and pressed my hand. "You must be brave, Bertie," she said in a low, roopy voice. "Some day another girl will come into your life, and you will be happy. When we're both old and grey, we shall laugh together over all this. Laugh, but I think with a tear behind the smile."
She popped off, leaving me feeling sick. The solid girl, whom I dimly heard telling the gardener he needn't be afraid of breaking that spade by leaning on it, came back and immediately proceeded, in which I considered an offensively familiar manner, to give me a hearty slap on the back. "Well, Worcester, old bloke," she said. "Well, gudgeon, old bird," I replied courteously. "Do you know, Worcester, I keep feeling there's something familiar about your name. I must have heard Harold mention it. Do you know Harold Anstruther?" I had recognised the name directly I heard Madeline Bassett utter it. Beefy Anstruther had been my partner at rackets my last year at Oxford, when I'd represented the establishment at that sport. I revealed this to the solid girl, and she slapped my back again. "I thought I wasn't wrong. Harold speaks very highly of you, Worcester, old-timer, and I'll tell you something. I've a lot of influence with Madeline, and I'll exert it on your behalf. I'll talk to her like a mother. Dash it all, we can't have her marrying a pill like Gussie Finknottle when there's a rackets blue on her waiting list. Courage, Worcester, old cock, courage and patience. Come and have a bit of breakfast." "Thanks awfully, no," I said, though I needed it sorely. "I must be getting along." "Well, if you won't, you won't, but I will. I'm going to have the breakfast of a lifetime. I haven't felt so roaring fit since I won the tennis singles at Rodine." I'd braced myself for another slap on the back, but with a swift change of policy she prodded me in the ribs, depriving me of what little breath her frightful words had left inside me. At the thought of what might result from a girl of her dominating personality talking to Madeline Bassett like a mother, I had wilted where I stood. It was with what are called leaden steps that I passed through the French window and made my way to the road. I was anxious to intercept Catsmeat when he drove out, so that I might learn from him the result of his interview. And of course when he did drive out, he was herring along at such a pace that it was impossible to draw myself to his attention. He vanished over the skyline as if he'd been competing in some event at Brooklands, leaving me standing. In sombre mood, bowed down with dark forebodings, I went off to get a bit of breakfast and catch a train back to King's Deverell. Chapter 18. The blokes who run the railway don't make it easy for you to get from Wimbledon to King's Deverell, feeling no doubt, and I suppose it's a kindly thought, that abode of thugs and ghouls is a place you're better away from. You change twice before you get to Basingstoke, and then change again and take the branch line. And once you're on the branch line, it's quicker to walk. The first person I saw when I finally tottered out at journey's end, feeling as if I'd been glued to the cushioned seat since early boyhood, and a bit surprised that I hadn't put out tendrils like a Virginia creeper, was my cousin Thomas. He was buying motion picture magazines at the bookstall. "Oh, hello," I said. "So you got here all right?" He eyed me coldly and said, "Crumbs," a word of which he's far too fond. This Toss is one of those tough, hard-boiled striplings, a sort of juvenile James Cagney with a touch of Edward G. Robinson. He has carroty hair and a cynical expression, and his manner is supercilious. You would think that anyone conscious of having a mother like my Aunt Agatha, and knowing it could be proved against him, would be crushed and apologetic. But this is not the case. He swanks about the place as if he'd bought it, and in conversation with a cousin lacks tact and is apt to verge on the personal. He became personal now, on the subject of my appearance, which I must confess was not spruce. Night travel in milk trains always tends to remove the gloss, and you can't hobnob with beetles in bushes and remain dapper. "Crumbs," he said. "You look like something the cat brought in." You see what I mean? The wrong note. In no frame of mind to bandy words, I clouted the child moodily on the head and passed on. And as I emerged into the station yard, somebody yoo-hooed, and I saw Corky sitting in her car. "Hello, Bertie," she said. "Where'd you spring from, moon of my delight?" She looked about her in a wary and conspiratorial manner, as if she'd been registering sneakiness in a spy film. "Did you see what was in the station?" she asked, lowering the voice. "I did. Jeeves delivered him as per memo last night. Uncle Sidney looked a little taken aback for a moment, and seemed as if he were on the point of saying some of the things he gave up saying when he took orders. But everything has turned out for the best. He loves his game of chess, and it seems that Thomas is the undisputed champion of his school, brimming over with gambits and openings and things. So they get along fine. And I love him. What a sympathetic, sweet-natured boy he is, Bertie." I blinked. You are speaking of my cousin Thomas? He's so loyal. When I told him about the heel Dobbs arresting Sam Goldwyn, he simply boiled with generous indignation. He says he's going to cosh him.
To what? Him?
It's something people do to people in detective stories. You use a small but serviceable rubber bludgeon.
He hasn't got a small but serviceable rubber bludgeon.
Yes, he has. He bought it in 7 Dials when he was staying at your flat. His original idea was to employ it on a boy called Stinker at Bramley-on-Sea, but it is now earmarked for Dobbs.
Oh, my God!
It will do Dobbs all the good in the world to be coshed. It may prove a turning point in his life. I have a feeling that things are breaking just right these days, and that very shortly an era of universal happiness will set in. Look at Cat's Meat if you want Exhibit A. Have you seen him?
Not to speak to, I said, speaking in a distrait manner, for my mind was still occupied with Toss and his plans. The last thing you want when the nervous system is in a state of hash are your first cousins socking policemen with rubber bludgeons. What about Cat's Meat?
Why, I met him just now, and he was singing like a linnet all over the place. He had a note from Gertrude last night, and she says that if and when she can elude her mother's eye, she will elope with him. His cup of joy is full.
I'm glad someone's is.
The sombreness of my tone caused her to look sharply at me, and her eyes widened as she saw the disorder of my outer crust. "Bertie, my lamb," she cried, visibly moved. "What have you been doing to yourself?
You look like something the cat brought in."
I was going to say something excavated from Tutankhamun's tomb, but your guess is as good as mine. What's been happening?"
I passed a weary hand over the brow. "Corky," I said, "I've been through hell."
"About the only place I thought you didn't have to go through to get to King's Deverell. And how were they all?"
"I have a frightful story to relate."
"Did somebody cosh you?"
"I've just come from Wimbledon."
"From Wimbledon? But Catsmeat was attending to the Wimbledon end. He told me all about it."
"He didn't tell you all about it because all about it is precisely what he doesn't know. If you've only heard Catsmeat's reminiscences, you simply aren't within 1,000,000 miles of being in possession of the facts. He barely scratched the surface of Wimbledon, whereas I... Would you care to have the ghastly details?" She said she would love to, and I slipped them to her, and for once she listened attentively from start to finish. An agreeable deviation from her customary deaf-adder tactics. I found her a good audience. She was properly impressed when I spoke of Gussie's letter, nor did she omit to draw the breath in sharply as I touched on the gudgeon and the sinister affair of the studio portrait. The facts in connection with the white woolly dog also went over big.
"Golly," she said as I wore to a close, "you do live, don't you, Bertie?"
I agreed that I lived, but expressed a doubt as to whether, the circumstances being what they were, it was worthwhile continuing to do so. One was rather inclined, I said, to murmur, "Death, where is thy sting?" and turn the toes up. "The best one can say," I concluded, "is that one has obtained a brief respite, if respite is the word, and that only if Catsmeat was successful in dissuading the Bassett from her awful purpose. For all I know, she may be coming on the next train."
"No, she's not. He headed her off."
"You had that straight from the horse's mouth?"
"Direct from his personal lips."
I drew a deep breath. This certainly put a brighter aspect on the cloud wreck. In fact, it seemed to me that hallelujah about summed it up, and I mentioned this. I was concerned to note that she appeared a bit dubious.
"Yes, I suppose hallelujah sums it up, to a certain extent. I mean, you can make your mind easy about her coming here. She isn't coming. But in the light of what you tell me about Mervyn Keane, clubman, and the studio portrait, it's a pity Catsmeat didn't hit on some other method of heading her off. I do feel that."
My heart stood still. I clutched at the windscreen for support and what-whatted.
"The great thing to remember, the thing to bear in mind and keep the attention fixed on, is that he meant well."
My heart stood stiller. In your walks about London, you will sometimes see bent, haggard figures that look as if they had recently been caught in some powerful machinery. They are those of fellows who got mixed up with Catsmeat when he was meaning well.
"What he told Miss Bassett was this. He said that on hearing that she was coming to the hall, you betrayed agitation and concern, and finally got it out of you what the trouble was. Loving her hopelessly as you do, you shrank from the agony of having to see her day after day in Gussie's society. My heart, ceasing to stand still, gave a leap and tried to get out through my front teeth. "He told Madeline Bassett that?" I quavered, shaking on my stem. "Yes, and implored her to stay away and not subject you to this anguish. He says he was terrific and wished 1 or 2 managers had been there to catch his work. And I think he must have been pretty good, because Miss Bassett cried buckets and said she quite understood and, of course, would cancel her visit, adding something in a low voice about the desire of the moth for the star and how sad life was. What do you say?" I explained that I had not spoken, merely uttered one of those hollow groans, and she agreed that in the Cirques hollow groans were perhaps in order. "But of course it wasn't easy for the poor angel to think of a good way of stopping her coming," she argued, "and the great thing was to stop her somehow." "True. So if I were you, I'd try to look on the bright side, count your blessings one by one, if you know what I mean." This is an appeal which, when addressed to Bertram Wooster, rarely falls on deaf ears. The stunned sensation which her words had induced did not actually leave me, but it diminished somewhat in intensity. I saw her point. "There is much in what you say," I agreed, rising on stepping stones of my dead self to higher things, as I have mentioned is my custom. "The great thing, as you justly remarked, was to stop the Bassett blowing in, and if that has been accomplished, one does wrong to be fussy about the actual mechanism. And after all, she was already firmly convinced of my unswerving devotion, so cat's meat hasn't really plunged me so very much deeper in the broth than I was before." "That's my brave little man. That's the way to talk." "We now have a respite, and all depends on how quickly you can put Gussie on ice. The moment that is done, the whole situation will clarify. Released from your fatal spell, he will automatically return to the old love, feeling that the cagey thing is to go where he's appreciated. When do you expect him to cool off?" "Very soon." "Why not instanter?" "Well, I'll tell you, Bertie, there's a little job I want him to do for me first." "What job?" "Ah, here's Thomas at last. He seems to have bought every fan magazine in existence. To read at the concert, if he's sensible. You haven't forgotten the concert is this evening? Well, mind you don't. And when you see Jeeves, ask him how that clack of Esmond's has come out. Hop in, Thomas." Thomas hopped in, giving me another of his supercilious looks, and when in, leaned across and slipped a penny into my hand, saying, "Here, my poor man," and urging me not to spend it on drink. At any other moment this coarse ribaldry would have woken the fiend that sleeps in Bertram Wooster and led to the young pot of poison receiving another clout on the head. But I had no time now for attending to tosses. I fixed Corky with a burning eye. "What job?" I repeated. "Oh, it wouldn't interest you," she said. "Just a trivial little job about the place." And she drove off, leaving me a prey to a nameless fear. I was hoofing along the road that led to the hall, speculating dully as to what precisely she had meant by the expression "trivial little job," when, as I rounded a corner, something large and Norfolk-coated hove in sight, and I identified it as Esmond Haddock. Chapter 19. Owing to the fact that on the instructions of Dame Daphne, safety first, Winkworth, port was no longer served after dinner, and the male and female members of the gang now left the table in a body at the conclusion of the evening repast, I'd not enjoyed a tete-a-tete with Esmond Haddock since the night of my arrival. I had seen him around the place, of course, but always in the company of a brace of assorted aunts, or that of his cousin Gertrude, in each case looking Byronic. Checking up with Jeeves, I find that is the word, all right. Apparently it means looking like the late Lord Byron, who was a gloomy sort of bird, taking things the hard way. We came together, he approaching from the nor'-nor'-east, and self approaching from the south-south-west, and he greeted me with a moody twitch of the cheek muscles, as if he'd thought of smiling and then thought again, and said, "Oh, to hell with it." "Hello," he said. "Hello," I said. "Nice day," he said. "Yes," I said. "Out for a walk?" "Yes," he said. "You out for a walk?" Prudence compelled me to descend to subterfuge. "Yes," I said. "I'm out for a walk. I just ran into Miss Pirbright."
At the mention of that name, he winced as if troubled by an old wound. "Oh," he said, "Miss Pirbright, eh?" He swallowed a couple of times. I could see a question trembling on his lips, but it was plainly one that nauseated him, for after uttering the word "was," he kept right along swallowing. I was just about to touch on the situation in the Balkans, in order to keep the conversation going, when he got it out. "Was, Worcester with her?" "No, she was alone." "You're sure?" "Certain." "He may have been lurking in the background, behind a tree or something." "The meeting occurred in the station yard." "He wasn't skulking in a doorway?" "Oh, no." "Strange. You don't often see her without Worcester these days," he said, and ground his teeth a trifle. I had a shot at trying to mitigate his anguish, which I could see was considerable. He, too, had obviously noted Gussie's spotty work, and it was plain that what is technically known as the green-eyed monster had been slipping it across him properly. "They're old friends, of course," I said. "Are they?" "Oh, rather. I should say they have known each other since childhood. They went to the same dancing class." The moment I'd mentioned that, I was wishing I hadn't, for it seemed to affect him as though some hidden hand had given him the hot foot. You couldn't say his brow darkened, because it had been dark to start with, but he writhed visibly, like Lord Byron reading a review of his last slim volume of verse and finding it a stinker. I wasn't surprised. A man in love and viewing with concern the competition of a rival does not like to think of the adored object and that rival pirouetting about together at dancing classes, and probably splitting a sociable milk and biscuit in the 11 o'clock interval. "Oh," he said, and gave a sort of whistling sigh, like the last whoosh of a dying soda-water siphon. "The same dancing class? The same dancing class, eh?" He brooded a while. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse and rumbling. "Tell me about this fellow Worcester, Gussie. Is he a friend of yours?" "Oh, yes." "Known him long?" "We were at school together." "I suppose he was a pretty loathsome boy, the pariah of the establishment?" "Oh, no." "Changed after he grew up, eh? Well, he certainly made up leeway all right, because of all the slinking snakes it has ever been my misfortune to encounter. He is the slimiest—" "Would you call him a slinking snake?" "I did call him a slinking snake, and I'll do it again as often as you wish. The fish-faced trailing arbutus." "He's not a bad chap." "That may be your opinion. It's not mine, nor, I should imagine, that of most decent-minded people. Hell is full of men like Worcester. What the devil does she see in him?" "I don't know." "Nor anyone else. I've studied the fellow carefully and without bias, and he seems to me entirely lacking in charm. Have you ever turned over a flat stone?" "From time to time." "And what came crawling out? A lot of obscene creatures that might have been his brothers. I tell you, Gussie, if you were to put a bit of gorgonzola cheese on the slide of a microscope and tell me to take a look, the first thing I'd say on getting it focused would be, 'Why, hello, Worcester.'" He brooded Byronically for a moment. "I know the specious argument you're going to put forward, Gussie," he proceeded. "You're going to say that it is not Worcester's fault that he looks like a slightly enlarged cheese mite. Very true. One strives to be fair, but it is not only the man's revolting appearance that distresses the better element. He is a menace to the community." "Oh, come." "What do you mean, oh, come? You heard what my Aunt Daphne was telling us at dinner the night you arrived, about this ghastly Worcester perpetually stealing policemen's helmets?" "Not perpetually, just as a treat on boat race night." He frowned. "I don't like the way you stick up for the fellow, Gussie. You probably consider that you're being broad-minded, but you want to be careful how you let that so-called broad-mindedness grow on you. It's apt to become mere moral myopia. The facts are well documented. Whenever Worcester has a spare moment, he goes about London persecuting unfortunate policemen, assaulting them, hampering them in their duties, making their lives a hell on earth. That's the kind of man Worcester is." He paused and became for a moment lost in thought. Then there flitted across his map another of those quick twitches which he seemed to be using nowadays on the just as good principle as a substitute for smiles. "Well, I'll tell you one thing, Gussie. I only hope he intends to start something on those lines here, because we're ready for him." "Eh?" "Ready and waiting. You know Dobbs?" "The flatty?" "Our village constable, yes, a splendid fellow, tireless in the performance of his duties." "I've not met him. I hear his engagement is broken off." So much the better, for it will remove the last trace of pity and weakness from his heart. I told Dobbs all about Worcester and warned him to be on the alert. And he is on the alert. He's straining at the leash. Let Worcester so much as lift a finger in the direction of Dobbs's helmet, and he's for it. You might not think so at a casual glance, Gussie, but I'm a justice of the peace. I sit on the bench at our local sessions and put it across the criminal classes when they start getting above themselves. It's my earnest hope that the criminal streak in Worcester will come to the surface and cause him to break out, because in that event Dobbs will be on him like a leopard, and he will come up before me, and I shall give him 30 days without the option, regardless of his age or sex.
I didn't like the sound of this. You wouldn't do that, Esmond?
I would. I'm looking forward to it. Let Worcester stray 1 inch from the straight and narrow path, just 1 inch, and you can kiss him goodbye for 30 days. Well, I'll be moving along, Gussie. I find it helps a little to keep walking.
He disappeared over the horizon at 5 mph, and I stood there aghast. The sense of impending peril was stronger on the wing than ever. Oh, that Jeeves were here, I said to myself. I found he was. For some little time past I'd been conscious of some substance in the offing that was saying, "Good morning, sir." And turning to see where the noise was coming from, I beheld him at my side, looking bronzed and fit, as if his visit to Bramley-on-Sea had done him good. Chapter 20.
"Good morning, sir," he said. "May I make a remark?"
Certainly, Jeeves. Carry on. Make several.
"It is with reference to your appearance, sir. If I may take the liberty of suggesting—"
Go on. Say it. I look like something the cat found in Tutankhamun's tomb, do I not?
"I would not go so far as that, sir, but I have unquestionably seen you more soigné."
It crossed my mind for an instant that with a little thought one might throw together something rather clever about way down upon the Soigné River, but I was too listless to follow it up.
"If you will allow me, sir, I will take the suit which you are wearing and give it my attention."
"Thank you, Jeeves."
"I will sponge and press it."
"Thank you, Jeeves."
"Very good, sir. A beautiful morning, is it not, sir?"
"Thank you, Jeeves." He raised an eyebrow.
"You appear distrait, sir."
"I am distrait, Jeeves, about as distrait as I can stick, and there's enough to make me distrait."
"Surely, sir, matters are proceeding most satisfactorily. I delivered Master Thomas at the vicarage, and I learned from my Uncle Charlie that her ladyship, your aunt, has postponed her visit to the Hall."
"Quite, but these things are mere side issues. I don't say they aren't silver linings in their limited way, but take a look at the clouds that lower elsewhere. First and foremost, that man is in again."
"Sir?"
I pulled myself together with a strong effort, for I saw that I was being obscure. "Sorry to speak in riddles, Jeeves," I said. "What I meant was that Gussie had once more become a menace of the first water."
"Indeed, sir? In what way?"
"I will tell you. What started all this ranny-gazoo?"
"The circumstances of Mr. Fink-Nottle being sent to prison, sir."
"Exactly. Well, it's an odds-on bet that he's going to be sent to prison again."
"Indeed, sir?"
"I wish you wouldn't say indeed, sir. Yes. The shadow of the pen is once more closing in on Augustus Fink-Nottle. The law is flexing its muscles and waiting to pounce. One false step, and he's bound to make at least a dozen in the first minute, and into the coop he goes for 30 days. And we know what'll happen then, don't we?"
"We do indeed, sir."
"I don't mind you saying indeed, sir, if you tack it onto something else like that. Yes, and we know what will happen, and the flesh creeps. What?"
"Distinctly, sir."
I forced myself to a sort of calm. Only a frozen calm, but frozen calms are better than nothing. "Of course, it may be, Jeeves, that I am mistaken in supposing that this old lag is about to resume his life of crime, but I don't think so. Here are the facts. Just now I encountered Miss Pirbright in the station yard. We naturally fell into conversation, and after a while the subject of Gussie came up. And we had been speaking of him for some moments when she let fall an observation that filled me with a nameless fear. She said there was a little job she was getting him to do for her, and when I said, 'What job?' she replied, 'Oh, just a trivial little job about the place.' And her manner was evasive, or shall I say furtive?
Whichever you prefer, sir."
It was the manner of a girl guiltily conscious of being in the process of starting something. "What ho! I said to myself. Hello, 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 hello. If I might interrupt you for a moment, sir, I am happy to inform you that my efforts to secure a cluck for Mr. Esmond Haddock at the concert have been crowned with gratifying success. The back of the hall will be thronged with his supporters and well-wishers. I frowned. This is excellent news, Jeeves, so I'm dashed if I can see what it's got to do with the raise under discussion. No, sir, I am sorry. It was your observing hello, 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 hello that put the matter into my mind. Pardon me, sir, you were saying... Well, what was I saying? I've forgotten. You were commenting on Miss Pirbright's furtive and evasive manner, sir. Ah, yes. It suggested that she was in the process of starting something, and the thought that smote me like a blow was this. If Corky is starting something, it's 100 to 8. It's something in the nature of reprisals against Constable Dobbs. Am I right or wrong, Jeeves? The probability certainly lies in that direction, sir. I know Corky. Her psychology is an open book to me, even in the distant days when she wore rompers and had a tooth missing in front. Hers was always a fiery and impulsive nature, quick to resent anything in the shape of umpus bumpus. And it is inevitably as umpus bumpus that she will have classed the zealous officer's recent arrest of her dog. And if she had it in for him merely on account of their theological differences, how much more will she have it in for him now? The unfortunate hound is languishing in a dungeon with gyves upon his wrists, and a girl of her spirit is not likely to accept such a state of things supinely. No, sir. You're right. No, sir. The facts are hideous, but we must face them. Corky is planning direct action against Constable Dobbs, taking we cannot say what form, and it seems only too sickeningly certain that Gussie, whom it is so imperative to keep from getting embroiled again with the force, is going to lend himself as an instrument to her sinister designs. And here's something that'll make you say, "Indeed, sir." I've just been talking to Esmond Haddock, and he turns out to be a J.P. He has the powers of the high, the middle, and the low justice in King's Deverill, and is consequently in a position to give anyone 30 days without the option as soon as look at them. And what's more, he has taken a violent dislike to Gussie, and told me in so many words that it is his dearest wish to see the Darbies clapped on him. Try that one on your pianola, Jeeves. He seemed about to speak, but I raised a restraining hand. I know what you're going to say, and I quite agree. Left to himself, with conscience as his guide, Gussie is the last person likely to commit a tort or malfeasance and start J.P.'s ladling out exemplary sentences. Quite true. From boyhood up, his whole policy, instilled into him, no doubt, at his mother's knee, has been to give the primrose path a solid miss, and sedulously avoid those rash acts which put wilder spirits in line for 30 days in the jug. But one knows that he is easily swayed. Catsmeat, for instance, swayed him in Trafalgar Square by threatening to bean him with a bottle. I shall be vastly surprised if Corky doesn't sway him too. And I know from personal experience, I said, thinking of that orange at the dancing school, that when Corky sways people, the sky is the limit. You think that Mr. Fink-Nottle will lend a willing ear to the young lady's suggestions? Her word is law to him. He will be wax in her hands. I tell you, Jeeves, the spirits are low. I don't know if you have ever been tied hand and foot to a chair in front of a barrel of gunpowder with an inch of lighted candle on top of it. No, sir, I have not had that experience. Well, that's how I'm feeling. I'm just clenching the teeth and waiting for the bang. Would you wish me to speak a word to Mr. Fink-Nottle, sir, warning him of the inadvisability of doing anything rash? There's nothing I'd like better. He might listen to you. I will make a point of doing so at the earliest opportunity, sir. Thank you, Jeeves. It's a black business, isn't it? Extremely, sir. I don't know when I've come across a blacker. Very, very murky everything is, with perhaps the exception of the affairs of Mr. Pirbright, sir. Ah, yes, cat's meat. I was informed of his lucky strike. His hat is on the side of his head, they tell me. He was distinctly in that position when I last saw him, sir. Well, that's something. Yes, that cheers the heart a bit, I said, for even when preoccupied with the stickiness of their own concerns, the Worcesters can always take time out to rejoice over a buddy's bliss. One may certainly chalk up Catsmeat's happy ending as a ray of light. And you say that the village toughs are going to rally round Mr. Haddock this evening? In impressive numbers, sir. Well, dash it, that's 2 rays of light.
And if you can talk Gussie out of making an ass of himself, that'll be 3. We're getting on. All right, Jeeves, push off and see what you can do with him. I should imagine you'll find him at the vicarage. Very good, sir. Oh, and Jeeves, most important, when at the vicarage, get in touch with young Toss and remove from his possession a blunt instrument known as a cosh, which he has managed to acquire. It's a species of rubber bludgeon, and you know as well as I do how reluctantly one would trust him with such a thing. You could go through the telephone book from A to Z without hitting on the name of anyone one wouldn't prefer to see with his hooks on a rubber bludgeon. You'll get an idea of what I mean when I tell you that he speaks freely of beaning Constable Dobbs with the weapon. So choke it out of him, without fail. I shan't be easy in my mind till I know you've got it. Very good, sir. I will give the matter my attention, he said, and we parted with mutual civilities, he to do his day's good deed at the vicarage, I to resume my hoofing in the opposite direction. And I had hoofed perhaps a matter of 200 yards when I was jerked out of the reverie into which I'd fallen by a sight which froze the blood and caused the 2 eyes, like stars, to start from their spheres. I had seen Gussie coming out of a gate of a picturesque cottage, standing back from the road behind a neat garden. King's Deverell was one of those villages where picturesque cottages breed like rabbits. But what distinguished this picturesque cottage from the others was that over its door were the royal arms and the words "Police Station." And evidence that the above legend was not just a gag was supplied by the fact that accompanying Gussie, not actually with a hand on his collar and another gripping the seat of his trousers, but so nearly so that the casual observer might have been excused for supposing that this was a pinch, was a stalwart figure in a blue uniform and a helmet, who could be no other than Constable Ernest Dobbs. Chapter 21. It was the first time I'd been privileged to see this celebrated Rosa, of whom I'd heard so much, and I think that even had the circumstances been less tense, I would have paused to get an eyeful, for his, like Silversmith's, was a forceful personality, arresting the attention and causing the passer-by to draw the breath in quite a bit. The sleepless guardian of the peace of King's Deverell was one of those chunky, knobbly officers. It was as though nature, setting out to assemble him, had said to herself, "I will not skimp." Nor had she done so, except possibly in the matter of height. I believe that in order to become a member of the force, you have to stand 5 feet 9 inches in your socks, and Ernest Dobbs can only have just got his nose under the wire. But this slight perpendicular shortage had the effect of rendering his bulk all the more impressive. He was plainly a man who, had he felt disposed, could have understudied the village blacksmith and no questions asked, for it could be seen at a glance that the muscles of his brawny arms were strong as iron bands. To increase the similarity, his brow at the moment was wet with honest sweat. He had the look of a man who has recently passed through some testing emotional experience. His eyes were aglow, his moustache a bristle, and his nose a wiggle. "Rah!" he said, and spat. Only that, and nothing more. A man of few words, apparently, but a good spitter. Gussie, having reached the great open spaces, smiled weakly. He, too, appeared to be in the grip of some strong emotion, and as I was also, that made 3 of us. "Well, good day, officer," he said. "Good day, sir," said the constable shortly. He went back into the cottage and banged the door, and I sprang at Gussie like a jumping bean. "What's all this?" I quavered. The door of the cottage opened, and Constable Dobbs reappeared. He had a shovel in his hand, and in this shovel one noted what seemed to be frogs. Yes, on a closer inspection, definitely frogs. He gave the shovel a jerk, shooting the dumb chums through the air, as if he'd been scattering confetti. They landed on the grass and went about their business. The officer paused, directed a hard look at Gussie, spat once more with all the old force and precision, and withdrew, and Gussie, removing his hat, wiped his forehead. "Let's get out of this," he urged, and it was not until we were some quarter of a mile distant that he regained a certain measure of calm. He removed his glasses, polished them, replaced them on his nose, and seemed the better for it. His breathing became more regular. "That was Constable Dobbs," he said. "So I deduced. From the uniform, no doubt." "That, and the helmet." "Quite," said Gussie. "I see, quite. I see, quite. I see."
It seemed possible that he'd go rambling on like this for a goodish while, but after saying quite about another 6 times, and I see about another 7, he snapped out of it.
"Bertie," he said, "you have frequently been in the hands of the police, haven't you?"
"Not frequently. Once."
"'Tis a ghastly experience, is it not? Your whole life seems to rise before you. By Jove, I could do with a drink of orange juice."
I paused for a moment to allow a dizzy feeling to pass. "What was happening?" I asked when I felt stronger.
"Eh?
What had you been doing?"
Who, me?"
"Yes, you."
"Oh," said Gussie in an offhand way, as if it were only what might have been expected of an English gentleman. "I've been strewing frogs."
I goggled. "Doing what?"
"Strewing frogs in Constable Dobbs's boudoir. The vicar suggested it."
"The vicar?"
"Well, I mean, it was he who gave Corky the idea. She'd been brooding a lot, poor girl, on Dobbs's high-handed behaviour in connection with her dog. And last night the vicar happened to speak of Pharaoh and all those plagues he got when he wouldn't let the children of Israel go. You probably recall the incident? His words started a train of thought. It occurred to Corky that if Dobbs were visited by a plague of frogs, it might quite possibly change his heart and make him let Sam Goldwyn go. So she asked me to look in at his cottage and attend to the matter. She said it would please her and be good for Dobbs, and would only take a few minutes of my time. She felt that the plague of lice might be even more effective, but she is a practical, clear-thinking girl, and realised that lice are hard to come by, whereas you can find frogs in any hedgerow."
Every mouse in my interior sprang into renewed life. With a strong effort I managed to refrain from howling like a lost soul. It seemed incredible to me that this super-goof should have gone through life all this while without fetching up in some loony bin. You would have thought that some such establishment as Coney Hatch, with its talent scouts out all over the place, would have snapped him up years ago. "Tell me exactly what happened. He caught you?"
"Fortunately, no. He came in about half a minute too late. I had bided my time, and having ascertained that the cottage was empty, I went in and distributed my frogs."
"And he was somewhere round the corner?"
"Exactly, in a sort of shed place by the back door, where I think he must have been potting geraniums or something, for his hands were all covered with mould. I suppose he'd come in to wash them. It was a most embarrassing moment. I didn't quite know how to begin the conversation. Eventually I said, 'Oh, hello, there you are.' And he stared at the frogs for some time, and then he said, 'What's all this?' They were hopping about a bit. You know how frogs hop."
"Hither and thither, you mean?"
"That's right, hither and thither. Well, I kept my presence of mind. I said, 'What's all what, officer?' And he said, 'All these frogs.' And I said, 'Ah, yes, there do seem to be quite a few frogs in here. You're fond of them?' He then asked if these frogs were my doing, and I said, 'In what sense do you use the word doing, officer?' And he said, 'Did you bring these frogs in here?' Well, then, I'm afraid I wilfully misled him, for I said, 'No.' It went against the grain to tell a deliberate falsehood, of course, but I do think there are times when one is justified in—"
"Get on!"
"Oh, but you bustle me so, Bertie. Where was I? Yes. I said no. I couldn't account for their presence in any way. I said it was just one of those things we should never be able to understand. Probably, I said, we were not meant to understand. And, of course, he could prove nothing. I mean, anyone could wander innocently into a room where there happened to be some frogs hopping about. The Archbishop of Canterbury, or anyone. I think he must have appreciated this, for all he did was mutter something about it being a very serious offence to bring frogs into a police station, and I said I supposed it was, and what a pity one could never hope to catch the fellow who had done it. And then he asked me what I was doing there, and I said I'd come to ask him to release Sam Goldwyn, and he said he wouldn't because he had now established that the bite Sam had given him was his second bite, and that the animal was in a very serious position. So I said, 'Oh, well, then, I think I'll be going,' and I went. He came with me, as you saw, growling under his breath. I can't say I liked the man. His manner is bad, brusque, abrupt. Not at all the sort of chap likely to win friends and influence people. Well, I suppose I'd better be getting along and reporting to Corky. That stuff about the second bite will worry her, I'm afraid."
Repeating his remark about being in the vein for a drink of orange juice, he set a course for the vicarage and pushed off. And I resumed my progress to the Deverilleries, speculating dully as to what would be the next horror to come into my life. It only needed a meeting with Dame Daphne Winkworth, I felt somberly, to put the tin hat on this dark day. My aim was to sneak in unobserved, and it seemed at first as though luck were with me. From time to time, as I slunk through the grounds, keeping in the shelter of the bushes and trying not to let a twig snap beneath my feet, I could hear the distant baying of ants, but I wasn't spotted. With something approaching a tra-la on my lips, I passed through the front door into the hall, and bing! Right in the middle of the fairway, arranging flowers at a table, Dame Daphne Winkworth. Well, I suppose Napoleon or Attila the Hun or one of those fellows would have just waved a hand and said, "Aha, there," and hurried on, but the feat was beyond me. Her eyes, swivelling round, stopped me like a bullet. The wedding guest, if you remember, had the same trouble with the Ancient Mariner. "Ah, there you are, Augustus!" Well, it was fruitless to deny it. I stood on one leg and dashed a bead of persp from the brow. "I had no time to ask you last night. Have you written to Madeline?" "Oh, yes, rather." "I hope you were properly apologetic?" "Oh, rather, yes." "And why are you looking as if you had slept in your clothes?" she asked, giving the upholstery a look of distaste. The thing about the Worcesters is that they know when to speak out and when not to speak out. Something told me that here was where manly frankness might pay dividends. "Well, as a matter of fact," I said, "I did. I ran up to Wimbledon last night on the milk train to see Madeline, don't you know? You know how it is. You can't say all you want to in letters, and I thought, well, the personal touch, if you see what I mean." It couldn't have gone better. I've never actually seen a shepherd welcoming a strayed lamb back into the fold, but I should imagine that his manner on such an occasion would closely parallel that of this female 20-minute egg, as she heard my words. The eyes softened, the face split in a pleased smile, that wrinkling of the nose which had been so noticeable a moment before, as if I'd been an escape of gas, or not quite up to sample egg, disappeared totally. It would not be putting it too strongly to say that she beamed. "Augustus!" "Well, I think it was a good move." "It was indeed. It is just the sort of thing that would appeal to Madeline's romantic nature. Why, you are quite a Romeo, Augustus, in the milk train. You must have been travelling all night." "Pretty well." "You poor boy, I can see you're worn out. I will ring for Silversmith to bring you some orange juice." She pressed the bell. There was a stage wait. She pressed it again, and there was another stage wait. She was on the point of giving it a third prod when the hour produced the man. Uncle Charlie entered left, and I was amazed to see that there was an indulgent smile on his face. It is true that he switched it off immediately and resumed his customary aspect of a respectful chunk of dough, but the facial contortion had unquestionably been there. "I must apologize for my delay in answering the bell, milady," he said. "When your ladyship rang, I was in the act of making a speech, and it was not until some moments had elapsed that I became aware of the summons." Dame Daphne blinked. "Me too." "Making a speech?" "In honour of the happy event, milady. My daughter Queenie has become affianced, milady." Dame Daphne O'Reilly'd, and I very nearly said, "Indeed, sir," for the information had come as a complete surprise. For one thing, I hadn't suspected for an instant that ties of blood linked this bulging butler and that lissom parlourmaid. And for another, it seemed to me that she'd got over a spot of Dobbs trouble pretty snappily. So this is what woman's constancy amounts to, is it? I remember saying to myself, and I'm not at all sure I didn't add the word "pho." "And who is the happy man, Silversmith?" "A nice, steady young fellow, milady. A young fellow called Meadows." I had a feeling I'd heard the name before somewhere, but I couldn't place it. Meadows? Meadows? No, it eluded me. "Indeed? From the village?" "No, milady. Meadows is Mr. Finknottle's personal attendant," said Silversmith, now definitely unshipping a smile and directing it at me. He seemed to be trying to indicate that after this he looked on me as one of the boys, and practically a relation by marriage, and that on his side at least no more would be said of my weakness for singing hunting songs over the port and introducing into country houses dogs that bit like serpents. I suppose the gasp that had escaped my lips sounded to Dame Daphne like the gurgle of a man dying of thirst, for she instantly put in her order for orange juice. "Silversmith had better take it to your room. You will be wanting to change your clothes." "He might tell Meadows to bring it," I said faintly. "Why, of course, you will want to wish him happiness." "That's right," I said. It was not immediately that Catsmeat presented himself. No doubt if you have made all your plans for marrying the daughter of the house and then suddenly find yourself engaged to the parlour-maid, you need a little time to adjust the faculties. When he finally did appear, it seemed to me from his dazed expression that he had still a longish way to go in that direction. His air was that of a man who has recently been coshed by a small but serviceable rubber bludgeon. "Bertie," he said, "a rather unfortunate thing has happened." "I know." "Oh, you know, do you? Then what do you advise?" There could be but one answer to this. "You'd better place the whole matter before Jeeves." "I will. That great brain may find a formula. I'll lay the facts before Jeeves and bid him brood on them." "But what are the facts? How did it happen?" "I'll tell you. Do you want this orange juice?" "No." "Then I'll have it. It may help a little." He drank deeply and mopped his forehead. "It all comes of letting that Dickens spirit creep over you, Bertie. The advice I give to every young man starting life is never get Dickensy. You remember I told you that for some days I've been bursting with a sort of yeasty benevolence. This morning it came to a head. I'd had Gertrude's note saying that she would elope with me, and I was just a solid chunk of sweetness and light. In ecstasies myself, I wanted to see happiness all around me. I loved my species and yearned to do it a bit of good. And with these sentiments fizzing about inside me, with the milk of human kindness sloshing up against my back teeth, I wandered into the servants' hall and found Queenie there in tears." "Your heart bled?" "Profusely. I said, 'There, there.' I took her hand and patted it. And then, as I didn't seem to be making any headway, almost unconsciously I drew her onto my knee and put my arm around her waist and started kissing her, like a brother." "Don't say Bertie. It was only what Sir Galahad or someone like that would have done in my place. Dash it, there's nothing wrong, is there, in acting like a sympathetic elder brother when a girl is in distress? Pretty square behaviour, I should have thought. But don't run away with the idea that I don't wish I hadn't yielded to the kindly impulse. I regret it sincerely, because at that moment Silversmith came in. And what do you think? He's her father." "I know." "You seem to know everything." "I do." "Well, there's one thing you don't know, and that is that he was accompanied by Gertrude." "Gosh!" "Yes, her manner on beholding me was a bit reserved. Silversmith's, on the other hand, wasn't. He looked like a minor prophet without a beard, suddenly confronted with the sins of the people, and started in immediately to thunder denunciations. There are fathers who know how to set about an erring daughter, and fathers who do not. Silversmith is one of the former. And then, in a sort of dream, I heard Queenie telling him that we were engaged. She has since informed me that it seemed to her the only way out. It did, of course, momentarily ease the strain." "How did Gertrude appear to take it?" "Not very blithely. I've just had a brief note from her cancelling our arrangements." He groaned, the sort of hollow groan I had been groaning so much of late. "You see before you, Bertie, a spent egg, a man in whom hope is dead. You don't happen to have any cyanide on you?" He groaned, another hollow one. "And on top of all this," he said, "I've got to put on a green beard and play Mike in a knockabout crosstalk act." I was sorry for the unhappy young blister, of course, but it piqued me somewhat that he seemed to consider that he was the only one who had any troubles. "Well, I've got to recite Christopher Robin poems." "Pah!" he said. "It might have been Winnie the Pooh." Well, there was that, of course. Chapter 22. The village hall stood in the middle of the high street, just abaft the duck pond, erected in the year 1881 by Sir Quentin Deverill, Bart, a man who didn't know much about architecture but knew what he liked. It was one of those mid-Victorian jobs in glazed red brick, which always seem to bob up in these old-world hamlets, and do so much to encourage the drift to the towns. Its interior, like those of all the joints of its kind I've ever come across, was dingy and fuggy and smelled in about equal proportions of apples, chalk, damp plaster, Boy Scouts, and the sturdy English peasantry. The concert was slated to begin at 8:15, and a few minutes before the kick-off,
my own little effort not being billed till after the intermission, I wandered in and took my place among the standees at the back, noting dully that I should be playing to absolute capacity. The populace had rolled up in droves, though I could have warned them that they were asking for it. I had seen the programme, and I knew the worst. The moment I scanned the bill of fare, I was able to understand why Corky, that afternoon at my flat, had spoken so disgruntledly of the talent at her disposal, like a girl who has been thwarted and frustrated and kept from fulfilling herself and what not. I knew what had happened. Starting out to arrange this binge with high hopes and burning ideals and all that sort of thing, poor child, she had stubbed her toe on the fatal snag which always lurks in the path of the impresario of this type of entertainment. I allude to the fact that at every village concert there are certain powerful vested interests which have to be considered. There are, that is to say, divers local nibs who, having always done their bit, are going to be pretty cold and sniffy if not invited to do it again this time. What Corky had come up against was the Kegley-Bassington clan. To a man of my wide experience, such items as Solo, Miss Muriel Kegley-Bassington, and Duologue, a pair of lunatics, Colonel and Mrs. R.P. Kegley-Bassington, told their own story, and the same thing applied to imitations, Watkin Kegley-Bassington, card tricks, Percival Kegley-Bassington, and rhythmic dance, Miss Poppy Kegley-Bassington. Master George Kegley-Bassington, who was down for a recitation, I absolved from blame. I strongly suspected that he, like me, had been thrust into his painful position by force majeure, and would have been equally willing to make a cash settlement. In the intervals of feeling a brotherly sympathy for Master George, and wishing I could run across him and stand him a commiserating ginger beer, I devoted my time to studying the faces of my neighbours, hoping to detect in them some traces of ruth and pity, and what is known as kind indulgence. But not a glimmer. Like all rustic standees, these were stern, implacable men, utterly incapable of taking the broad, charitable view and realizing that a fellow who comes on a platform and starts reciting about Christopher Robin, going hoppity-hoppity-hop, or alternatively saying his prayers, does not do so from sheer wantonness, but because he's a helpless victim of circumstances beyond his control. I was gazing with considerable apprehension at a particularly dangerous specimen on my left, a pleasure-seeker with hair oil on his head, and those mobile lips to which the raspberry springs automatically, when a mild splatter of applause from the two bob seats showed that we were off. The vicar was opening the proceedings with a short address. Apart from the fact that I was aware that he played chess and shared with Catsmeat's current fiancée a dislike for hearing policemen make cracks about Jonah and the whale, the Reverend Sidney Purbright had hitherto been a sealed book to me. And this was, of course, the first time I'd seen him in action. A tall, drooping man, looking as if he'd been stuffed in a hurry by an incompetent taxidermist. It became apparent immediately that he was not one of those boisterous vicars who, when opening a village concert, bound on the stage with a whoop and a holler, give the parishioners a huge hallo, slam across a couple of travelling salesmen and farmers' daughter stories, and bound off beaming. He seemed low-spirited, as I suppose he had every right to be, with Corky permanently on the premises, doing the little mother, and Gussie rolling up for practically every meal. And on top of that, a gorilla like young Toss coming and parking himself in the spare bedroom. You could scarcely expect him to bubble over with joie de vivre. These things take their toll. At any rate, he didn't. His theme was the church organ, in aid of which these grim doings had been set afoot. And it was in a vein of pessimism that he spoke of its prospects. The church organ, he told us frankly, was in a hell of a bad way. For years it had been going around with holes in its socks, doing the brother can you spare a dime stuff. And now it was about due to hand in its dinner pail. There had been a time when he'd hoped that the pulled-together spirit might have given it a shot in the arm, but the way it looked to him at the moment, things had gone too far, and he was prepared to bet his shirt on the ballet contrivance going down the drain and staying there. He concluded by announcing somberly that the first item on the programme would be a violin solo by Miss Eustacia Pulbrook, managing to convey the suggestion that while he knew as well as we did that Eustacia was going to be about as corny as they come, he advised us to make the most of her, because after that we should have the Kegley-Bassington family at our throats. Except for knowing that when you've heard one, you've heard them all, I'm not really an authority on violin solos, so cannot state definitely whether La Pulbrook's was or was not a credit to the accomplices who had taught her the use of the instrument. It was loud in spots, and less loud in other spots, and it had that quality which I've noticed in all violin solos of seeming to last much longer than it actually did. When it eventually blew over, one saw what the sainted Sydney had meant about the Kegley-Bassingtons. A minion came on the stage, carrying a table. On this table he placed a framed photograph, and I knew that we were for it. Show Bertram Wooster a table and a framed photograph, and you don't have to tell him what the upshot is going to be. Muriel Kegley-Bassington stood revealed as a my hero from the Chocolate Soldier Addict. I thought the boys behind the back row behaved with extraordinary dignity and restraint, and their suavity gave me the first faint hope I'd had that when my turn came to face the firing squad, I might be spared the excesses which I had been anticipating. I would rank my hero next after the Yeoman's Wedding Song as a standee rouser, and when a large blonde appeared and took up the photograph and gave it a soulful look, and rubbed her hands in the rosin and inflated her lungs, I was expecting big things. But these splendid fellows apparently did not war on women. Not only did they refrain from making uncouth noises with the tongue between the lips, one or two actually clapped. An imprudent move, of course, because, taken in conjunction with the applause of the two bobbers, who applaud everything, it led to, "Oh, who will o'er the downs with me?" as an encore. Inflamed by this promising start, Muriel would, I think, willingly have continued, probably with the Indian love call, but something in our manner must have shown her that she couldn't do that there here, for she shrank back and withdrew. There was a brief stage wait, and then a small bullet-headed boy in an Eton jacket came staggering on like Christopher Robin going hoppity-hoppity-hop, in a manner that suggested that blood relations in the background had overcome his reluctance to appear, by putting a hand between his shoulder blades and shoving. Master George Kegley-Bassington, and no other. My heart went out to the little fellow. I knew just how he was feeling. One could picture so clearly all that must have led up to this rash act. The first fatal suggestion by his mother that it would please the vicar if George gave that recitation which he did so nicely, the agonized "Oi!" the attempted rebuttal, the family pressure, the sullen scowl, the calling in of father to exercise his authority, the reluctant acquiescence, the dash for freedom at the 11th hour, foiled, as we have seen, by that quick thrust between the shoulder blades. And here he was, out in the middle. He gave us an unpleasant look and said, "Ben Battle." I pursed the lips and shook the head. I knew this Ben Battle, for it had been in my own repertoire in my early days, one of those gruesome antiques with a pun in every other line, the last thing to which any right-minded boy would wish to lend himself, and quite unsuited to this artiste's style. If I'd had the air of Colonel and Mrs. R.P. Kegley-Bassington, I would have said to them, "Colonel, Mrs. Kegley-Bassington, be advised by an old friend. Keep George away from comedy and stick to good sound, dangerous Dan McGrews. His forte is grimness." Having said Ben Battle, he paused and repeated the unpleasant look. I could see what was passing through his mind. He wished to know if anybody out front wanted to make anything of this. The pause was a belligerent pause, but it was evident that it had been misinterpreted by his nearest and dearest, for two voices, both loud and carrying, spoke simultaneously from the wings. One had a parade ground rasp, the other was that of the songstress who had so recently my heroed. "Ben Battle was a soldier bold." "All right,"
said George, transferring the unpleasant look in that direction. "I know. Ben Battle was a soldier bold and used to war's alarms. A cannonball took off his leg, so he laid down his arms," he added, crowding the thing into a single word. He then proceeded. "Well, really, come, I felt, as he did so. This is most encouraging. Can it be, I asked myself, that these rugged exteriors around me hide hearts of gold? It certainly seemed so, for despite the fact that it would have been difficult, nay, impossible, to imagine anything lousier than Master George Kegley Bassington's performance, it was producing nothing in the nature of a demonstration from the standees. They had not warred on women, and they did not war on children. Might it not quite easily happen, I mused, that they would not war on Woosters? Tails up, Bertram, I said to myself, and it was with almost a light heart that I watched George forget the last 3 stanzas and shamble off, giving us that unpleasant look again over his shoulder, and in the exuberance with which I greeted the small man with the face, like an anxious marmoset, Adrian Higgins, I gathered from my programme. By profession, I subsequently learned, King's Deverell's courteous and popular gravedigger. There was something that came very close to being carefree. Adrian Higgins solicited our kind attention for impressions of woodland songsters which are familiar to you all. And while these did not go with any particular bang, the farmyard imitations which followed were cordially received, and the drawing of a cork and pouring out a bottle of beer, which took him off, made a solid hit, leaving the customers in excellent mood. With the conclusion of George's recitation, they were feeling that the worst was behind them, and a few clenched teeth would see them through the remainder of the Kegley-Bassington offensive. There was a general sense of relaxation, and Gussie and Catsmeat could not have had a better spot. When they came on, festooned in green beards, they got a big hand. It was the last time they did. The act died standing up. Right from the start I saw that it was going to be a turkey, and so it proved. It was listless. It lacked fire and oomph. The very opening words struck a chill. "Hello, Pat," said Catsmeat in a dull, toneless voice. "Hello, Mike," said Gussie with equal moodiness. "How's your father?" "He's not enjoying himself just now." "What's he doing?" "7 years," said Catsmeat glumly, and went on in the same depressed way to speak of his brother Jim, who, having obtained employment as a swimming teacher, was now often in low water. Well, I couldn't see what Gussie could have on his mind unless he was brooding on the church organ, but Catsmeat's despondency was, of course, susceptible of a ready explanation. From where he stood, he had an excellent view of Gertrude Winkworth in row 1 of the 2 bob seats, and the sight of her, looking pale and proud in something which I should say at a venture was mousseline, must have been like a sword thrust through the bosom. Just as you allow a vicar a wide latitude in the way of gloom when his private life has become cluttered up with corkies and gussies and tosses, so should you, if a fair-minded man, permit a tortured lover, confronted with the girl he has lost, to sink into the depths a bit. Well, that's all right. I'm not saying you shouldn't, and as a matter of fact, I did. If you'd come along and asked me, "Has Claude Catamole Purbright your heartfelt sympathy, Worcester?" I would have replied, "You betcha he has my heartfelt sympathy. I mourn in spirit." All I do say is that this Byronic outlook doesn't help you bang across your points in a Pat and Mike knockabout crosstalk act. The whole performance gave one a sort of grey, hopeless feeling, like listening to the rain at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in November. Even the standees, tough, rugged men, who could not have recognized the finer feelings if you'd served them up on a plate with watercress round them, obviously felt the pathos of it all. They listened in dejected silence, shuffling their feet, and I didn't blame them. There should be nothing so frightfully heart-rending in one fellow asking another fellow who that lady was he saw him coming down the street with, and the other fellow replying that there was no lady, that was his wife. An amusing little misunderstanding, you would say. But when Gussie and Catsmeat spoke the lines, they seemed to bring home to you all the underlying sadness of life. At first, I couldn't think what the thing reminded me of. Then I got it. At the time when I was engaged to Florence Cray, and she was trying to jack up my soul, One of the methods she employed to this end was to take me on Sunday nights to see Russian plays, the sort of things where the old home is being sold up and people stand around saying how sad it all is. If I had to make a criticism of Catsmeat and Gussie, I should say that they got too much of the Russian spirit into their work. It was a relief to one and all when the poignant slice of life drew to a close. "My sister's in the ballet," said Catsmeat despondently. There was a pause here, because Gussie had fallen into a sort of trance and was standing staring silently before him, as if the church organ had really got him down at last, and Catsmeat, realizing that only moral support, if that, was to be expected from this quarter, was obliged to carry on the conversation by himself, a thing which I always think spoils the effect on these occasions. The essence of a cross-talk act is that there should be wholesome give and take, and you never get the same snappy zip when one fellow is asking the questions and answering them himself. "You say your sister's in the ballet?" said Catsmeat with a catch in his voice. "Yes, begorra, my sister's in the ballet. What does your sister do in the ballet?" he went on, taking a look at Gertrude Winkworth and quivering in agony. "She comes rushing in and she goes rushing out. What does she have to rush like that for?" asked Catsmeat with a stifled sob. "Faith and begob, because it's a Russian ballet." And, too broken in spirit to hit Gussie with his umbrella, he took him by the elbow and directed him to the exit. They moved slowly off with bowed heads, like a couple of pall-bearers who have forgotten their coffin and had to go back for it, and to the rousing strains of "Hello, hello, 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 a hunting we will go pom-pom," Esmond Haddock strode masterfully onto the stage. Esmond looked terrific. Anxious to omit no word or act which would assist him in socking the clientele on the button, he'd put on full hunting costume, pink coat and everything, and the effect was sensational. He seemed to bring into that sombre hall a note of joy and hope. After all, you felt there was still happiness in the world. Life, you told yourself, was not all men in green beards saying "faith and begorra." To the practised eye like mine, it was apparent that in the interval since the conclusion of the scratch meal, which had taken the place of dinner, the young squire had been having a couple. But as I often say, why not? There was no occasion on which a man of retiring disposition with an inferiority complex and all the trimmings needs the old fluid more than when he's about to perform at a village concert. And with so much at stake, it would have been madness on his part not to get moderately ginned. It is to the series of quick ones which he had absorbed that I attribute the confident manner of his entry, but the attitude of the audience must speedily have convinced him that he could really have got by perfectly well on lime juice. Any doubt lingering in his mind as to his being the popular pet must have been dispelled instantly by the thunders of applause from all parts of the house. I noted 12 distinct standees who were whistling through their fingers, and those who were not whistling were stamping on the floor. The fellow with the hair oil on my left was doing both. And now, of course, came the danger spot. A feeble piping at this point, like gas escaping from a pipe, or let us say a failure to remember more than an odd word or two of the subject matter, and a favourable first impression might well be undone. True, the tougher portion of the audience had been sedulously stood beers over a period of days, and in return had entered into a gentleman's agreement to be indulgent. But nevertheless it was unquestionably up to Esmond Haddock to deliver the goods. He did so abundantly, and in heaping measure. That first night over the port, when we'd been having our run-through, my thoughts at the outset had been centred on the lyric, and I'd been too busy polishing up Aunt Charlotte's material to give much attention to the quality of his voice. And later on, of course, I had been singing myself, which always demands complete concentration. When I was on the chair, waving my decanter, I had been aware, in a vague sort of way, of some kind of disturbance in progress on the table. But if Dame Daphne Winkworth on her entry had asked me my opinion of Esmond Haddock's timbre and brio, I should have had to reply that I really hadn't noticed them much. He now stood forth as the possessor of a charming baritone, full of life and feeling, and above all, loud. And volume of sound is what you want at a village concert. Make the lights flicker and bring plaster down from the ceiling, and you're home.
Esmond Haddock did not cater simply for those who had paid the price of admission. He took in strollers along the High Street, and even those who had remained at their residences curled up with a good book. Catsmeat, you may recall, in speaking of the yells which Dame Daphne and the Mrs. Deverell had uttered on learning of his betrothal to Gertrude Winkworth, had hazarded the opinion that they could have been heard at Basingstoke. I should say that Basingstoke got Esmond Haddock's hunting song nicely. If so, it got a genuine treat, and one of some duration, for he took 3 encores, a couple of bows, a 4th encore, some more bows, and then the chorus once over again by way of one for the road. And even then his well-wishers seemed reluctant to let him go. This reluctance made itself manifest during the next item on the programme, Glee, oh, come unto these yellow sands, by the church choir, conducted by the schoolmistress, in murmurs at the back and an occasional "Hello!" But it was not until Miss Poppy Kegley Bassington was performing her rhythmic dance that it found full expression. Unlike her sister Muriel, who had resembled a Criterion barmaid of the old school, Poppy Kegley Bassington was long and dark and supple, with a sinuous figure suggestive of a snake with hips. One of those girls who do rhythmic dances at the drop of a hat, and can be dissuaded from doing them only with a meat axe. The music that accompanied her act was oriental in nature, and I should be disposed to think that the thing had started out in life as a straight vision of Salome, but had been toned down and had the whistle blown on it in spots, in deference to the sensibilities of the Women's Institute. It consisted of a series of slitherings and writhings, punctuated with occasional pauses, when, having got herself tied in a clove hitch, she seemed to be waiting for someone who remembered the combination to come along and disentangle her. It was during one of these pauses that the plug-ugly with the hair oil made an observation. Since Esmond's departure he had been standing with a rather morose expression on his face, like an elephant that has had its bun taken from it, and you could see how deeply he was regretting that the young squire was no longer with us. From time to time he would mutter in a peevish undertone, and I seemed to catch Esmond's name. He now spoke, and I found that my hearing had not been at fault. "We want Haddock," he said. "We want Haddock. We want Haddock. We want Haddock. We want Haddock." He uttered the words in a loud, clear, penetrating voice, not unlike that of a costermonger informing the public that he has blood oranges for sale, and the sentiment expressed evidently chimed in with the views of those standing near him. It was not long before perhaps 20 or more discriminating concert-goers were also chanting, "We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock!" And it just shows you how catching this sort of thing is. It wasn't more than about 5 seconds later that I heard another voice intoning, "We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock!" and discovered with a mild surprise that it was mine. And as the remainder of the standees, some 30 in number, also adopted the slogan, this made us unanimous. To sum up, then, the fellow with hair oil, 50 other fellows, also with hair oil, and I, had begun to speak simultaneously, and what we said was, "We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock! We want Haddock!" There was some shushing from the 2 bobbers, but we were firm, and though Miss Kegley Bassington pluckily continued to slither for a few moments longer, the contest of wills could have but one ending. She withdrew, getting a nice hand, for we were generous in victory, and Esmond came on, all boots and pink coat. And what with him going a-hunting at one end of the hall and our group of thinkers going a-hunting at the other, the thing might have occupied the rest of the evening quite agreeably, had not some quick-thinking person dropped the curtain for the intermission. You might have supposed that my mood, as I strolled from the building to enjoy a smoke, would have been one of elation, and so for some moments it was. The whole aim of my foreign policy had been to ensure the making of a socko by Esmond, and he had made a socko. He had slain them and stopped the show. For perhaps the space of a quarter of a cigarette I rejoiced unstintedly. Then, My uplifted mood suddenly left me. The cigarette fell from my nerveless fingers, and I stood rooted to the spot, the lower jaw resting negligently on the shirt front. I just realized that, what with one thing and another, my disturbed night, my taxing day, the various burdens weighing on my mind and so forth, every word of those Christopher Robin poems had been expunged from my memory, and I was billed next but two after intermission.